Welcome, listeners, to a new saga of myth and legend brought to you by Anana's creation. Today, we journey to a world veiled by mist and ruled by fate, where warriors are forged in the crucible of battle and legends are born from the whispers on the wind. Our story begins not on a field of glorious combat, but in the quiet heart of a land that had known peace for far too long. A peace that was about to be shattered. Story begins in the sprawling, green expanse of the northern plains, nestled between the formidable Greyfong Mountains and the Whispering Serpents River, lay the settlement of Oakhaven. It wasn't a grand city of stone and spire, but a town carved from the very heart of the ancient forest. Its people were resilient, their hands calloused from the plow and the axe, their spirits as sturdy as the ancient oaks that gave the town its name. For generations, their greatest conflicts were against the biting winter winds and the stubbornness of the soil. They had forgotten the scent of a battlefield, the clang of sword against shield. War was a distant echo, a tale told by grandfathers to frighten wide-eyed children. Our story centers on a young woman named Evelyn. She was not a shield maiden of legend, nor a seer who could divine the future in the patterns of smoke. She was a hunter, and a damn good one. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves, a fiery cascade that she often tied back with a simple leather cord. Her eyes, a startling shade of forest green, missed nothing. They could track a deer through the densest thicket or spot a hawk circling miles above. Her movements were fluid and silent, a dance of predator and prey that she had perfected since she was old enough to hold a bow. Her father, a kind, broad-shouldered man named Mason, had taught her everything he knew. He was the town's leader, a man respected not for his ferocity, but for his wisdom. He believed that a steady hand and a calm heart could solve any problem, a philosophy that had kept Oakhaven safe and prosperous. But a shadow was beginning to stretch across the land, a shadow that no amount of calm reasoning could deter. It began as a rumor, a traveler's tale spoken in hushed tones over flickering tavern fires. A warlord from the desolate, sun-scorched lands of the south was on the move. His name was Kale, and they said he led an army of men who fought not for gold or glory, but for the sheer, brutal joy of conquest. They called his army the Iron Horde, for they moved like a single, unstoppable machine, clad in dark, unforgiving steel. At first, the people of Oakhaven dismissed the stories. The south was a world away, and their lands were protected by the natural fortress of the mountains and the river. They were safe. They had always been safe. Evelyn, however, felt a prickle of unease, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. As a hunter, she understood the signs of a predator. She saw it in the unnatural stillness of the forests, the way birds would suddenly fall silent, the way deer herds were migrating north in unusual numbers. Something was coming. The land itself could feel it. One evening, as the sun bled orange and purple across the sky, a lone rider galloped into Oakhaven, his horse lathered and near collapse. He was a scout from a settlement 2 days south, and his face was a mask of terror. He spoke of fire and death, of a relentless tide of iron and fury that had wiped his home from the face of the earth. The Iron Horde was not a rumor. It was a reality, and it was heading north. Panic, a venomous serpent, began to coil around the hearts of the townsfolk. Mason called a council in the Great Hall, its hearth fire casting long, dancing shadows on the worried faces of the elders. They argued for hours. Some insisted on sending envoys, offering tribute. Others clamored to abandon their homes and flee north. Mason, ever the voice of reason, tried to instill calm, but his words felt hollow even to himself. How do you reason with the force of nature? Evelyn stood in the back, listening, her hand resting on the familiar, worn wood of her bow. She knew that diplomacy would fail, and fleeing would only delay the inevitable. The predator had their scent. It would hunt them down. She felt a strange sense of clarity amidst the chaos, a cold, hard purpose crystallizing within her. She was a hunter, and Oakhaven was her territory. She would not let it be destroyed. As the council descended into frightened bickering, Evelyn slipped out of the hall unnoticed. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. She walked to the edge of the settlement, to the ancient, weathered monoliths known as the Sentinel Stones. They were relics of a forgotten age, covered in swirling runes that no one could read. Legend said they were gateways, places where the veil between worlds was thin. It was here she often came to think. As she stood before the largest stone, She ran her fingers over the carved symbols, feeling the hum of ancient energy beneath the cold rock. She closed her eyes and spoke into the darkness, not to any god she knew, but to the wind, to the stones, to the very spirit of the land she called home. "If anyone can hear me," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "If there are any guardians of this world, any protectors of the innocent, we need you now. I will not run. I will fight. Show me the way." Her words seemed to be swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the night. Disappointment settled in her chest, heavy and cold. Had she really expected an answer? She was about to turn away when a sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, extinguishing the torches at the edge of town and plunging her into near total darkness. It was an unnatural wind, cold and sharp, carrying with it a sound she had never heard before, a faint, ethereal melody like the chiming of distant, crystal bells. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She strained her ears, listening. The sound grew louder, weaving through the trees, a hauntingly beautiful song that seemed to pull at her very soul. And then she saw it, a light. High above the treetops, a pinpoint of silver-blue brilliance descended from the heavens. It was not a star nor the moon. It moved with purpose, gliding silently toward the sentinel stones. The light descended into the clearing, hovering just above the central stone. It pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, casting the ancient runes in an otherworldly glow. The air grew thick with an energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Fear warred with a powerful, inexplicable sense of awe. Evelyn stood frozen, her hand gripping her bow so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was no longer just a hunter in a quiet town. She was a witness to something impossible, a silent participant in a celestial event. In that moment, as the strange, beautiful light illuminated her determined face, she felt a profound shift within herself. The whisper on the wind had been answered, and the path of her life, the fate of Oakhaven, was about to be changed forever. The age of peace was over. The age of legends had just begun. The light in the clearing pulsed with the gentle rhythm of a sleeping heart, washing over Evelyn in waves of cool, blue-white energy. The haunting melody that had drawn her to the stones now seemed to emanate from the light itself, a symphony of starlight and ancient power. She remained motionless, a statue carved from disbelief, her hunter's instincts screaming at her to flee while some deeper, more curious part of her soul compelled her to stay. The world she knew, a world of dirt, wood, and steel, was dissolving around her, replaced by something far older and more profound. Slowly, the sphere of light began to change. It elongated, stretching vertically until it formed a shimmering, human-like silhouette. The brilliance softened, the edges coalescing into definite lines, as if a sculptor were carving a figure from raw luminescence. A woman took shape before Evelyn's eyes. She was tall and slender, yet she possessed an aura of immense strength. Her armor was unlike anything Evelyn had ever seen. It wasn't made of leather or iron, but seemed to be forged from woven starlight and polished moonbeams, shifting and glowing with a soft internal fire. Long, silver hair, so pale it was almost white, cascaded over her shoulders like a frozen waterfall. But it was her eyes that held Evelyn captive. They were the color of a winter sky at twilight, holding an ancient wisdom and a sorrow that seemed as vast as the heavens themselves. There was no menace in her gaze, only a profound, piercing intensity, as if she could see every choice Evelyn had ever made and every path that lay before her. The celestial being took a step forward, her movements silent and graceful. The air crackled around her. When she spoke, her voice was not just a sound, but a feeling. It resonated within Evelyn's chest, a harmonious chord that was both powerful and comforting. "You called, daughter of Oakhaven," the being said, her voice like the chime of distant bells. "And we heard. Few in this age have the courage to speak to the wind and expect an answer." Evelyn finally found her breath, though her voice came out as a ragged whisper. "Who? What are you?" "I have many names," the woman replied, a faint, sad smile gracing her lips. "Some call my kind the weavers of fate, others the battle maidens. To the heroes of old, we were the choosers of the valiant. You may call me Lyra." The names settled in the air between them, imbued with a power that Evelyn could feel in her bones. A battle maiden, a chooser. The old tales, the ones dismissed as children's stories, rushed to the forefront of her mind, tales of warrior spirits who descended upon battlefields to guide the worthy to a glorious afterlife. She had always thought them mere fantasy. The Iron Horde, Evelyn said, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual strength. They are coming. They destroyed the southern settlements. They will destroy us, too. I ask for help. Will you fight for us? Lyra's starlit eyes softened with a touch of pity. That is not our way, Evelyn. We do not turn the tide of war. We are not soldiers in the conflicts of mortals. We are witnesses. We are guides. We watch as the great tapestry of destiny is woven, and we are there to greet the threads that are cut. Her gaze became sharp, focused. But your plea was different. It was not a prayer for salvation, but a vow of defiance. You did not beg for safety. You asked for a way to fight. This we can grant. Evelyn stared, confused. Grant? How? I am one woman, a hunter. My people are farmers and craftsmen. We cannot stand against an army like Kale's. An army is more than just a collection of soldiers, Lyra countered, her voice ringing with authority. It is a manifestation of will. Their will is for destruction. Yours must be for survival. The courage of a single heart, when truly ignited, can become a fire that forges an army. Lyra glided closer, stopping just a few feet from Evelyn. She raised a hand, her palm glowing with a soft light. The world believes our time is past, that the age of magic and heroes is over. It is not over. It is merely sleeping. You have awakened something, Evelyn. Something within yourself. From the light in her palm, an object began to materialize. It was an arrowhead, but unlike any Evelyn had ever crafted. It was carved from a milky white crystal that seemed to drink the moonlight. Intricate, glowing blue runes, similar to those on the sentinel stones, swirled across its surface. This is a whisper of our power, Lyra explained, offering the arrowhead to Evelyn. It is not a weapon of ultimate victory. It will not slay your enemies for you, but it is a key. When you are ready, fire it into the heart of the oldest oak in the town square. It will show your people that the age of heroes has not ended. It will grant you a clarity of purpose and a voice that will turn fearful farmers into determined defenders. It will be a symbol, a sign that their cause is just and that the ancient powers of this land stand with them. Evelyn reached out a trembling hand and took the arrowhead. It was cool to the touch, yet it pulsed with a vibrant, living warmth that spread up her arm and into her chest. It felt both impossibly light and incredibly heavy, weighted with purpose. Why me? Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible. I'm not a leader. My father is. Your father is a good man, a shepherd for a time of peace, Lyra said gently. But a storm requires a lightning rod. Fate has chosen you, Evelyn. Your heart holds the spark. The question is, will you let it burn? Will you accept this burden? Evelyn looked down at the glowing arrowhead in her hand, then back up at the celestial warrior before her. The fear was still there, a cold current beneath the surface, but it was being replaced by a fierce, burning resolve. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. To refuse was to accept the end of her world. To accept was to grasp a sliver of hope, no matter how impossible it seemed. She clenched her fist around the arrowhead, its light flaring between her fingers. I accept. A brilliant, approving smile transformed Lyra's face, making her appear momentarily less like an ancient, sorrowful being and more like a proud older sister. Then go. Be the lightning in the storm. Evelyn of Oakhaven. We will be watching. With those final words, Lyra's form began to dissolve. She didn't walk away or fly. She simply unraveled, her body breaking apart into 1,000 points of silver blue light. The motes of starlight swirled in a vortex. The beautiful melody swelled to a final, breathtaking crescendo, and then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light shot upwards into the night sky and vanished. Evelyn was left alone in the clearing, the sudden silence deafening. The only light was from the pale moon, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the normal, natural wind. In her hand, the crystal arrowhead still pulsed with a soft, steady glow, a tangible proof that what she had just experienced was real. She had spoken to the wind, and a star had answered. Now, she had to face her people, not just as a hunter, but as the bearer of a miracle and the new, terrifying weight of their survival. Evelyn walked back towards the flickering lights of Oakhaven, the world feeling both the same and irrevocably different. The cool night air still carried the familiar scent of pine, and the crunch of leaves under her boots was the same sound she had known her entire life. Yet, everything was changed. The sky seemed deeper, the stars brighter. The arrowhead in her hand was a constant, warm pulse against her palm, a secret sun in the darkness. Lyra's words echoed in her mind, "Be the lightning in the storm." The thought was terrifying. Lightning was destructive, chaotic, and brilliant. She was Evelyn the hunter, quiet, patient, precise. How could she possibly be lightning? As she neared the great hall, the sounds of panicked voices grew louder, spilling out into the night. The argument she had left behind was still raging, a fire fueled by fear. She saw the faces of her friends and neighbors through the large open doorway, twisted with anxiety and despair. She saw her father, Mason, standing in the center, his face etched with exhaustion as he tried to placate the most vocal and fearful of the elders. They were a flock of sheep surrounded by wolves, bleeding in terror with no idea where to run. For a moment, Evelyn hesitated. The doubt crept back in, a cold whisper telling her she was a fool. Who would listen to her? Who would believe a wild story about a star woman and a magical arrowhead? They would call her mad, driven to hysterics by the impending threat. But then she felt the warmth of the crystal in her hand, a steady, reassuring presence. It was real. Lyra was real. And the alternative, to do nothing, was a certainty of destruction. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and strode into the great hall. She did not shout or demand attention. She simply walked to the center of the room, her movements imbued with the newfound purpose that hummed within her. She stopped beside her father, her green eyes sweeping across the stunned faces of the council. The hall fell silent. Her sudden, resolute appearance was so out of character that it commanded their attention more effectively than any shout could have. "Evelyn," Mason said, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. "You should be at home. This is no place." "You are wasting time," Evelyn said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the thick air of panic. It was her own voice, yet it carried a new resonance, a depth that made every person in the hall lean forward to listen. Arguing about whether to flee or to beg for mercy is a fool's debate. The wolf is at the door. It does not care if you run or if you plead. It only cares about the kill. An old, cantankerous elder named Samuel scoffed. "And what would you have us do, girl? Fight? You're a hunter, not a soldier. Look at us. We are farmers. We have hunting bows and wood axes, not swords and shields. We would be slaughtered." A murmur of agreement went through the crowd. Evelyn's gaze met Samuel's unflinching. "We have more than that," she said, her voice rising with passion. "We have the heart of this forest in our blood. We have the strength of the mountains in our bones. And we have a will to live that no southern warlord can ever understand. You have forgotten what it means to fight for your home because you have never had to. Now, you must remember." She turned from the council and walked out of the great hall, not waiting for a response. She knew they would follow. Curiosity and the sheer force of her conviction would be enough to draw them out. She marched directly into the center of the town square, her destination the ancient, colossal oak tree that stood as the living heart of Oakhaven. Its branches were as thick as a man's body, its bark a gnarled map of centuries. It had been there long before the first settlers, a silent witness to their entire history. The townsfolk trickled out after her, their faces illuminated by torchlight, whispering amongst themselves. What was the girl doing? Had she lost her mind? Evelyn ignored them. She reached the base of the great oak, placed her hand on its rough bark, and closed her eyes for a second, feeling the deep, slow life within it. Then, she pulled her bow from her shoulder. From her pouch, she drew the crystal arrowhead. A collective gasp went through the crowd as they saw it. The arrowhead pulsed with a soft, undeniable blue light, casting an ethereal glow on Evelyn's determined face. It was a piece of the night sky, a fallen star held in her hand. She carefully knocked the magical arrow to her bowstring, the familiar motion calming her racing heart. She aimed not at a branch, but at the very center of the massive trunk, what the children called the heart of the oak. "What is she doing?" someone whispered in the stunned silence. Evelyn drew the bowstring back, her muscles coiling. The world narrowed to the glowing point of the arrow and the ancient bark of the tree. "Be the lightning." With a final, steadying breath, she released. The arrow flew true, a streak of blue light in the darkness. It did not make the expected thud of an arrow striking wood. Instead, the moment it touched the tree, there was a sound like a single, perfectly clear bell chime that resonated through the entire square. The arrowhead sank into the wood and vanished, but its light did not. A brilliant network of glowing blue runes, the same she had seen on the sentinel stones and on the arrow itself, erupted from the point of impact. They spread across the surface of the trunk and up the massive branches like lightning captured in ice, illuminating the entire square in a mystical, blue-white light. The leaves of the ancient oak began to shimmer, each one edged in silver. The crowd stared, mouths agape, their fear momentarily forgotten and replaced by pure, unadulterated awe. It was a miracle. It was undeniable magic. Evelyn lowered her bow and turned to face them, her form silhouetted against the glowing tree. The light seemed to amplify her voice, giving it a power that reached every ear and every heart. "You want a sign?" she cried out. "Here is your sign. The old powers have not abandoned us. The very land we stand on is with us. This light is a promise. It is a symbol that we are not alone. Kale and his iron horde, they march with steel and hate. But we will fight with the strength of this forest, with the light of this hope, and with the fire in our hearts. I will not abandon my home. I will not run. I will stand here, and I will fight. Who will stand with me?" For a long moment, there was only the soft hum of the glowing tree. Then, a single voice, a young farmer named Ben, shouted from the crowd, "I will." Another voice followed, and then another, and another, until the entire square was filled with a roar of unified defiance. The fear had not vanished, but it had been transformed, reforged in the light of the miracle into a weapon of courage. They looked at Evelyn, no longer as the hunter, the girl, but as their leader, their lightning. Mason watched from the edge of the crowd, his face a complex mask of shock, fear, and overwhelming pride. A new age for Oakhaven had just begun, born in a flash of impossible light. The sun rose the next morning on a changed Oakhaven. A strange, beautiful silence had replaced the frantic terror of the day before. In the center of the town square, the great oak still pulsed with a soft, ethereal blue light, its glow a constant, silent testament to the impossible events of the previous night. The townsfolk moved with a quiet purpose, their eyes often drifting to the tree, as if to reassure themselves that it was real. The fear hadn't vanished. It was a cold stone in the pit of their stomachs, but it was now overlaid with something new, a fragile, yet fierce, resolve. Evelyn had not slept. She had spent the night watching the glowing tree, the weight of 1,000 lives settling onto her shoulders. She was their symbol of hope, their lightning. But she knew that symbols and light could not stop the advance of the Iron Horde. For that, they needed steel, strategy, and a will as strong as the ancient wood of the tree itself. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky, she found her father, Mason, standing by the entrance to their home, staring at the transformed town. His expression was a mixture of awe and deep, parental worry. "It's real," he murmured, not taking his eyes off the tree. "I still can't quite believe it." "It is," Evelyn said, stopping beside him. "But the light is only a promise, Father. It's not a shield." Mason finally turned to look at her, and for the first time, she saw that he wasn't just looking at his daughter. He was looking at his leader. The shift was subtle, but undeniable. "They are looking to you, Evelyn," he said, his voice heavy. "The elders, the young ones, everyone. Yesterday, I tried to lead them as a shepherd. But you were right. We don't need a shepherd. We need a hunter." He placed a large, calloused hand on her shoulder. "I am proud of you, and I am terrified for you. Whatever you need, whatever you command, I will see it done. My wisdom in organizing the people is yours to use." The gesture, the passing of authority, was a profound moment. It strengthened Evelyn's resolve. "Thank you, Father," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I will need it. I need you." She then raised her voice, projecting it across the square. "Jacob, Ben, Sarah, I need you. All hunters, all blacksmiths, all woodworkers. Meet me at the Great Hall. Now. We have work to do." A new council gathered within the hour. It was not a council of elders debating politics, but a council of war built from the town's most practical hands. Jacob, the blacksmith, a mountain of a man with soot permanently etched into his skin, stood with his thick arms crossed. Sarah, The head of the Woodworkers Guild, her hands nimble and strong, was there. Ben, the young farmer who had first pledged his support, represented the able-bodied men and women who knew the land better than anyone. Evelyn's handful of fellow hunters stood by her side, their faces grim and ready. Evelyn unrolled a crude map of the region on the great table. "They will come from the south," she began, her voice crisp and clear, leaving no room for argument. "They will likely follow the river. It's the most direct path." "We could try to hold the river crossing," Mason suggested. Evelyn shook her head. "A direct confrontation would be suicide. They have numbers and experience. We have us." She looked at the hunters. "But we have the forest. It is our greatest weapon. We will not give them an open battle. We will make them bleed for every single step they take through our lands." Her plan was simple and brutal, born from a lifetime of tracking prey. They would fell massive trees to block the main paths, forcing the Iron Horde into narrower, more treacherous trails. They would dig pits lined with sharpened stakes hidden under layers of leaves. They would set snares, not for deer, but for men. The forest, which had always been their provider, would become their executioner. "We need weapons," Jacob, the blacksmith, grunted. His voice was a low rumble. "I can't forge 100 swords in a week. There isn't enough time or quality steel." "Then don't forge swords," Evelyn countered, her eyes gleaming with intensity. "Forge spearheads. Hundreds of them. Give me arrowheads until your hands bleed. We will make the shafts from the straightest ash wood. Every farmer has a scythe, every woodcutter an axe. Sharpen them. Reinforce the handles. These will be our weapons. Not elegant, but deadly." A new energy filled the hall, the energy of creation and purpose. Sarah, the woodworker, began sketching designs for makeshift shields and barricades. Mason started organizing the people into teams, some for foraging, some for crafting weapons, others for digging traps. Later that day, the training began. The town square, once a place for markets and festivals, was transformed into a training ground. Under the serene blue glow of the magical oak, the sounds of a town preparing for war echoed. The rhythmic clang, clang, clang from Jacob's forge was the new heartbeat of Oakhaven. The sharp thwack of arrows hitting straw targets replaced the laughter of children. Evelyn and her hunters moved through the lines of nervous archers, correcting their stance, teaching them to breathe, to aim, to become one with their bow. Evelyn noticed Ben fumbling with a roughly made spear. His knuckles were white, his movements clumsy. The fiery defiance from the night before had been replaced by the cold, clumsy reality of holding a weapon he knew he would soon have to use to take a life, or lose his own. He looked up and saw her watching, his face flushing with shame. She walked over, her expression not one of judgment, but of understanding. "It feels wrong in your hands, doesn't it?" she said quietly. "It's meant for turning the soil, not for this." Ben nodded, unable to speak. "Good," Evelyn said, surprising him. "The moment a weapon like this feels natural in a farmer's hand is the moment we become like them. Hold on to that feeling, Ben. It's what reminds you what we're fighting for. Not for conquest, but for the right to put this spear down and pick up a shovel again." She adjusted his grip. "Now let's try again. Your life may depend on it." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows that danced with the tree's mystical light, Evelyn stood and watched her town. They were not an army. They were farmers, blacksmiths, mothers, and fathers. They were clumsy, they were scared, and they were hopelessly outmatched. But they were no longer lost. The light in the tree had given them a miracle to believe in, but it was the sweat on their brows and the calluses forming on their hands that were truly forging their will to survive. The Iron Horde was coming, but Oakhaven would not be waiting like sheep for the slaughter. It would be waiting like a trap, silent and ready to spring. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks in which Oakhaven was reborn in the image of its newfound resolve. The gentle rhythms of village life were replaced by the harsh cadence of a war camp. The air, once filled with the scent of sawdust and baking bread, now perpetually carried the metallic tang of the forge and the sweat of hard labor. Children, too young to fight, acted as lookouts from the highest branches of the trees, while the elderly meticulously fletched arrows, their wrinkled hands moving with a slow, steady purpose. The people were tired, their bodies ached with unfamiliar work, but their eyes held a hard, determined light. The glowing oak stood at the center of it all, a beacon of silent reassurance in the long, tense nights. Evelyn had honed them as best she could. She had organized scouting parties to patrol the edges of their territory, creating a perimeter of watchful eyes. It was on one such patrol, deep in the southern woods, that the inevitable finally happened. She was leading a small group of her best hunters, including Ben, who had proven to be surprisingly adept and steady under pressure. They moved like ghosts through the forest, their steps silent, their senses on high alert. For days, the woods had felt wrong. An unnatural stillness had fallen, the kind that precedes a massive predator. It was Evelyn who caught the first sign, a scent on the wind, faint but unmistakable. It was not the familiar smell of damp earth or wild animals. It was the cold, sharp scent of iron, multiplied 1,000 times over. It was the smell of a massive army, of steel armor and drying blood. "Down," she whispered, her voice a low command. Instantly, her team melted into the undergrowth, becoming one with the shadows. They crept forward, moving from tree to tree, until they reached the edge of a ridge that overlooked the main southern trail. What they saw below stole the breath from their lungs. It was the Iron Horde. They were not a chaotic rabble of raiders, as the rumors had suggested. They were an army, disciplined and terrible. Rank upon silent rank of soldiers marched in perfect unison, their dark iron armor absorbing the daylight, giving them the appearance of a moving river of shadow. There were no war cries, no boastful shouts, just the relentless, soul-crushing rhythm of thousands of armored boots trampling the earth and the dull, rhythmic clank of weapons and shields. They moved with the unstoppable certainty of a glacier, carving a dead, brown path through the green forest. At their head rode a figure on a massive black warhorse. He was huge, clad in ornate, black-and-plate armor etched with cruel-looking barbs. His helmet was forged in the shape of a snarling beast, but it was his eyes, visible even from a distance, that were his most terrifying feature. They were cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of any emotion save a chilling, predatory focus. This had to be Kale. He was not a mindless brute. He was a conqueror, a methodical architect of destruction. Evelyn and her scouts watched, mesmerized by the sheer horror of the spectacle. The army was even larger than the refugees had described. It felt less like a force of men and more like a force of nature, a plague of iron locusts set to devour the world. As they watched, a small detachment of soldiers broke from the main column and approached a small, abandoned hunter's cabin nestled in a clearing. Evelyn held her breath. The cabin was empty, its owner having wisely fled north days ago. The soldiers did not search it or loot it. With a terrifying, casual efficiency, one of them simply tossed a torch onto its dry, thatched roof. The cabin was engulfed in flames within moments. They watched it burn for a minute, their faces impassive, before turning and rejoining the marching column without a backward glance. They were not just conquering the land. They were erasing it, wiping away any trace of the people who had lived there. The message was clear. There would be no negotiation. There would be no surrender. There would only be annihilation. Ben looked at Evelyn, his eyes wide with a terror that was threatening to overwhelm his newfound courage. He had held a spear in his hands for 2 weeks, but only now did he truly understand what it meant to face the men on the other end of it. Evelyn met his gaze, her own face pale but set like stone. She put a calming hand on his shoulder, her touch firm and steady. Her expression was not one of fear, but of cold, calculating fury. She was a hunter, and she was looking at the predator that had invaded her territory. "We have seen enough," she whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. "We go now." Not a sound. The retreat back to Oakhaven was a tense, silent journey. Every rustle of a leaf, every snap of a twig, sounded like an approaching enemy soldier. The scent of iron seemed to cling to them, a phantom reminder of the doom that was marching just a few miles behind. They arrived back at Oakhaven as dusk was falling. Evelyn didn't waste a moment. She climbed onto the central platform in the square, the light from the magical oak illuminating her grim face. The clang of the forge and the thwack of arrows ceased as every person in the village gathered, sensing the urgency. "I have seen them," Evelyn announced, her voice carrying across the silent square. "They are 2 hours behind us. They march without stopping. They will be here by morning." A wave of fear, a collective, audible gasp, rippled through the crowd. "Do not be afraid," Evelyn commanded, her voice cutting through the rising panic like a knife. "I have seen their numbers. I have seen their discipline, but I also saw their arrogance. They burn empty homes. They believe this is just another settlement to be erased from their path. They do not know about the traps we have set. They do not know that the forest itself is our ally. And they do not know that we are not farmers cowering in our homes. We are the guardians of Oakhaven. She drew a deep breath, her eyes finding the faces of her friends and neighbors in the crowd. The time for preparation is over. Every minute from now until dawn is precious. Man the barricades. Take your positions in the trees. Check your bowstrings and sharpen your blades. Sleep if you can, but keep your weapons close. Tonight, we are the calm before the storm. At dawn, we are the storm. A quiet, somber determination settled over the people. They dispersed not in a panic, but with a grim sense of purpose, moving to their designated posts. The final, anxious hours had begun. As the last light of day faded, Oakhaven fell into a watchful silence, waiting for the dawn and the inevitable tide of iron that it would bring. The darkness before dawn is a cold, breathless thing. It is a time of absolute silence, when the world seems to hold its breath in anticipation of the sun. But on this morning, the silence over Oakhaven was different. It was not peaceful. It was a taut, stretched silence, filled with the unspoken fears of 100 souls waiting for the end of their world. Evelyn stood atop the main barricade, a crude but sturdy wall of sharpened logs and packed earth at the southern edge of the town. Behind her, the magical oak cast its gentle, unwavering blue light, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. In front of her lay the forest, a black maw of shadows and secrets. She clutched her bow, its familiar weight a small comfort. Around her, the defenders of Oakhaven were frozen at their posts, their faces pale masks in the gloom. She could hear their shallow, nervous breathing, see the whites of their eyes as they stared into the woods. They had done everything they could. The traps were set. The arrows were nocked. Their will had been forged. Now, all that was left was the waiting. And then it began. It was not a sound at first, but a feeling. A low, rhythmic vibration that seemed to come from the ground itself. It grew steadily, a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated in their bones. Thump thump, thump thump. It was the sound of thousands of feet, marching in perfect, terrifying unison. The heartbeat of a monster. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was a physical pressure against their ears. Then, a single, solitary note cut through the air. A deep, mournful blast from a war horn. It was a sound of profound menace, a promise of death that echoed through the silent trees and washed over the barricades, chilling every defender to the core. This was it. They were here. Through the pre-dawn mist, the first ranks of the Iron Horde emerged from the trees. They moved with the same horrifying discipline Evelyn had witnessed before, a wave of dark iron and grim purpose. Their arrogance was palpable. They marched in a tight, dense column, expecting to simply roll over the town's pathetic defenses and burn it to the ground before breakfast. They did not see the carefully disguised pitfall, a massive trench filled with sharpened stakes, hidden just inside the forest's edge. The front ranks marched directly onto the disguised surface. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with a great cracking of branches and a roar of collapsing earth, the ground gave way. The front lines of the Iron Horde vanished, swallowed by the forest floor. Screams of shock and agony erupted from the pit, the first sounds of pain in the battle, and they did not come from the people of Oakhaven. The disciplined column behind them faltered, confusion rippling through their ranks. This was the moment Evelyn had been waiting for. She raised her arm, a silent signal. Now, she roared, her voice cutting through the morning air. From the trees, from behind hidden earthen mounds, and from the top of the barricades, 100 bowstrings sang their deadly song. The first volley of Oakhaven's arrows arched through the sky, a dark cloud that fell upon the disorganized soldiers. The air was filled with the sickening sound of arrows finding their mark, followed by more screams and shouts of rage. The Iron Horde's arrogant advance had been shattered into a bloody, chaotic mess. From his position in the rear, Cale watched, his helmeted face betraying no emotion. He saw his elite vanguard fall into a simple pitfall, saw his soldiers being picked off by unseen archers. He had underestimated this place. With a simple hand gesture, he signaled for his own archers to advance. They moved forward, firing volleys into the trees, but their arrows largely struck empty branches and thick trunks. Oakhaven's defenders were too well hidden. Cale's cold eyes scanned the forest. He would not waste his army on this foolishness. He gestured again, and a smaller, more specialized unit moved forward. These soldiers carried large, heavy shields and short, broadswords. They moved in a crouched, careful formation, their shields raised to protect them from arrows, tapping the ground before them to check for more traps. They were tasked with probing the defenses and clearing a path. One of these squads, consisting of 5 soldiers, managed to navigate the outer traps and reached a small, secondary barricade manned by Ben and a handful of other farmers. For Ben, the battle had been a distant thing until this moment. The sound of screams, the sight of falling bodies. Now it was here. It was the sight of a massive, armor-clad soldier vaulting over the barricade, his face a snarl of hate, his sword raised to strike. Time seemed to slow down. All the training, all of Evelyn's words, boiled down to this single, terrifying moment. Ben reacted on pure instinct. He thrust his sharpened spear forward. The soldier, expecting a clumsy farmer, was caught by surprise. The spearhead glanced off his shield but slid upwards, finding the gap in the armor at his throat. The soldier made a gurgling sound and fell backward, clutching at the spear shaft. The victory lasted only a second. The other 4 soldiers were on them, and the clearing erupted into a desperate, brutal melee. It was not a graceful dance of swords. It was a clumsy, grunting, terrifying struggle for life. A farmer swung his wood axe, a soldier parried with his sword, the clash of steel echoing through the woods. Ben, his spear stuck in his first kill, drew a long hunting knife and fought with the ferocity of a cornered animal. They were outnumbered, but they fought with the desperate strength of people defending their homes. They managed to drive the squad back, but not before 2 of their own lay dead on the ground. As the first rays of the sun finally broke through the trees, casting long, bloody shadows across the battlefield, a grim realization settled over both sides. Evelyn, watching from the main wall, saw the cost of that small victory. Her strategy had worked. They had bloodied the Iron Horde, but the horde was vast. For every soldier they killed, 10 more stood waiting. Kale now understood the nature of the fight. This would not be a simple slaughter. It would be a grinding, bloody siege. He raised his hand, and the war horns blew again. This time, it was not a single, mournful note. It was a chorus of horns, a deafening, unified blast that signaled the advance of his entire army. The probing was over. The real war had just begun. The sound of the unified war horns was not just a noise. It was a physical force, a wave of sound that hammered against the barricades and rattled the defenders' bones. In response to that sound, the Iron Horde transformed. No longer a single, vulnerable column, they spread out, forming a wide, implacable front. A line of soldiers carrying massive, tower-like shields locked them together, creating a moving wall of iron. Behind this wall, the bulk of the army advanced, protected from the hail of arrows that had decimated their vanguard. It was a slow, grinding advance, a tide of iron that was methodical, relentless, and terrifying. From her vantage point on the main barricade, Evelyn watched them come. Her hunter's mind, accustomed to finding the weakness in a single animal, now raced to find a flaw in the living machine approaching her home. "Archers," she bellowed, her voice sharp and commanding over the din, "don't waste arrows on the shields. Aim for their feet. Aim for the gaps. Make every shot count." The Oakhaven archers adjusted their aim, their arrows now skipping under the shields or trying to find the small viewing slits. A few soldiers cried out and fell, but the iron wall kept moving, the bodies of the fallen trampled under the feet of the men behind them. The Horde's own archers returned fire, their arrows thudding into the wooden barricade and the earthen mounds around the defenders. The air became thick with the whistle of flying shafts. The distance closed with agonizing slowness. 100 yards. 50. 20. Then, with a guttural roar, the front line of the Horde charged, crashing against the main barricade like a massive wave against a cliff. The world dissolved into a cacophony of brutal, deafening noise. The splintering crash of iron axes against sharpened logs, the shriek of metal scraping on wood, the grunts of exertion, and the screams of the wounded. This was no longer a battle of tactics and archery. It was a desperate, close-quarters brawl for survival. The men and women of Oakhaven fought with a ferocity they never knew they possessed. They jabbed with their crude spears through gaps in the wall, swung their heavy wood axes, and used their hunting knives with deadly effect. Jacob, the blacksmith, stood like a great bear, his massive smithing hammer rising and falling, crushing shields and helmets with sickening force. Ben fought beside him, his movements no longer clumsy, but driven by a desperate, adrenaline-fueled precision. But the Iron Horde was a relentless, faceless enemy. For every soldier that fell, two more seemed to take his place, their dark helmets and emotionless faces a terrifying vision of endless hate. They climbed over their own dead, trying to gain purchase on the top of the barricade. Hands with iron gauntlets clawed at the logs, trying to pull them apart. The defenders were fighting for their lives, but they were tiring. The sheer weight and pressure of the assault was beginning to wear them down. Evelyn saw it happening. She saw the exhaustion in Jacob's eyes, the wild panic returning to the face of a young woman fighting with a pitchfork. The line was starting to sag. A section of the barricade splintered and broke, and an Iron Horde soldier managed to scramble through, his sword raised high. Before he could strike, Evelyn's bow sang, and an arrow sprouted from his chest. But another was right behind him. The tide was about to overwhelm them. Despair, cold and sharp, began to cut through the heat of the battle. It was in that moment of near-breaking desperation that something changed. The magical oak tree, which had been a silent, glowing beacon, seemed to sense the faltering will of its people. The soft blue light in its branches and trunk suddenly pulsed, flaring with a brilliant, intense light. A wave of visible energy, a gentle ripple of shimmering blue, expanded from the tree in a perfect circle. It was not an explosion. It was not a weapon. It was a breath. The wave washed over the defenders of Oakhaven. It carried no sound, only a feeling of profound, invigorating calm. The panic in their hearts was soothed. The fire of exhaustion in their muscles was cooled. A second wind, pure and potent, flooded their limbs. Their senses sharpened, and their resolve, which had been about to shatter, was reforged into something harder than iron. Evelyn felt it wash over her, a cool wave that cleared her mind and steadied her trembling hands. She looked at Jacob and saw the weariness in his face replaced by a fresh surge of raw power. He let out a mighty roar and swung his hammer in a great arc, clearing a whole section of the wall. Then, fighting beside him, moved with a newfound confidence, his spear a blur of motion. All along the line, the people of Oakhaven rallied, shouting their defiance. They surged forward in a unified wave of their own. Fueled by this inexplicable strength, they pushed the attackers back from the broken barricade. They fought with a coordination and ferocity that stunned the professional soldiers of the Horde. They were no longer just farmers with makeshift weapons. They were a single, unified body with the heart of a lion. From his command post on the ridge, Cale watched the scene with disbelief, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. He saw his elite soldiers, men who had broken the gates of fortified cities, being thrown back by a rabble of villagers. He saw the impossible pulse of blue light and the subsequent, inexplicable rally. This was not a normal battle. This was something else. A flicker of frustration, the first he had felt in years, sparked in his cold eyes. This village possessed a power he did not understand, and that made it both an obstacle and a prize. He gave the signal to fall back and regroup. The war horns blew a different tune now, a sharp, commanding recall. The Iron Horde disengaged, retreating in a disciplined, orderly fashion, leaving their dead at the foot of the barricade. Silence, broken only by the groans of the wounded, fell over the battlefield. The defenders of Oakhaven stood on their wall, breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and battered, but they stood victorious. They had held back the tide. But as they looked out at the massive army regrouping just beyond their reach, they knew this was only a temporary reprieve. They had won the battle for the wall, but Cale's cold, calculating gaze promised that the war was far from over. The silence that followed the retreat of the Iron Horde was heavier and more haunting than the chaos of battle had been. For a long moment, the defenders of Oakhaven simply stood, leaning on the splintered barricade, their chests heaving as the adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the hollow ache of shock. The air was thick with the smell of blood and churned earth. The ground outside their wall was littered with the dark, armored forms of the fallen enemy, a grim testament to the fight. But it was the cost on their side of the wall that truly mattered. Victory had left deep, ragged scars. Evelyn's first thought was not of triumph, but of her people. She slid down from her perch on the barricade, her legs trembling slightly. The wave of unnatural strength from the oak had faded, leaving her feeling as though she carried the weight of the entire forest on her shoulders. She moved along the line, her eyes scanning the faces of her friends and neighbors. Some were tending to the wounded, using torn scraps of clothing for bandages. Others were simply staring into the distance, their eyes vacant, trying to process the brutal reality of what they had just survived. She found Ben sitting on an overturned crate, his spear lying forgotten at his feet. His hands were covered in blood, some of it his own, from a shallow cut on his arm, but most of it belonging to others. He was staring at his palms as if they were alien things, unable to reconcile the farmer's hands he knew with the killer's hands he now saw. He didn't seem to notice Evelyn's approach. "Ben," she said softly. He looked up, and she saw the profound shock in his eyes. "I killed a man, Evelyn," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Two of them. I felt the spear go in." Evelyn knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her own heart ached with the same cold horror. "We all did things today we never thought we would," she said, her voice low and steady. "Do not let the horror of the act make you forget the reason for it. You did it so your family could live. You did it to protect your home. Hold on to that. It's the only thing that separates us from them." Leaving Ben to his thoughts, she continued her walk. She saw her father, Mason, his face a grim mask of sorrow, directing a group of women as they gently carried a fallen villager away from the wall. Their eyes met across the square, and in that silent glance, a universe of shared pain and resolve passed between them. There was no time for words, no time for grief. There was only the work that had to be done. She found Jacob the blacksmith wrenching an enemy sword out of the barricade's timber. A nasty gash ran down his forearm, but he ignored it, his face set in a furious scowl. "The wall is splintered here," he grunted, not looking at her. "They almost broke through. We need to reinforce it with iron plates." He was already planning for the next attack, channeling his rage and grief into the familiar, comforting language of his craft. "Do it," Evelyn ordered. "Sarah," she called to the head woodworker, "get Jacob whatever he needs. We need this wall stronger than it was." An hour later, after the most urgent of the wounded had been cared for, Evelyn called her small war council to the base of the glowing oak. The reality of their situation was stark. They had lost 12 people, with dozens more too injured to fight. Their arrow supply was less than half of what it had been at dawn. "We held them," Mason said, his voice weary. "The light from the tree, it saved us." "It gave us strength," Evelyn clarified, looking up at the gently pulsing runes. "It did not swing our axes for us. It is tied to our will. If we had broken, I do not think it would have been enough. We cannot rely on a miracle to win this war." She turned her gaze to the forest. "Kale is not a fool. He threw his best soldiers at our wall, and we threw them back. He won't make the same mistake twice. He'll try something different." As if on cue, a young scout, one of the children posted as a lookout, came scrambling down from a tall tree on the edge of the town. His face was white with panic. "Evelyn," he gasped, running to her. "The horde. They're not leaving. What are they doing?" Evelyn asked, her body instantly tensing. "They're spreading out," the boy said, breathing heavily. "All around us. They have us surrounded. And they're chopping down trees. A lot of them. They're building something." Evelyn and the others followed the boy to the edge of the town and climbed a lookout post. In the distance, they could see the disciplined lines of the Iron Horde, methodically encircling their entire settlement, cutting off any hope of escape. And just beyond arrow range, a large group of soldiers was working with terrifying efficiency. The sound of their axes echoed across the field. They were stripping the logs, lashing them together, constructing some kind of massive, crude machine. It was a battering ram, a monstrous engine of destruction, designed for a single purpose: to smash through the very gate they were so desperately trying to reinforce. Kale's new strategy was brutally clear. He had tested their defenses and found them surprisingly strong. So he would no longer try to climb over them. He would obliterate them. The brief, bloody victory at the wall was over. The siege of Oakhaven had begun. The days that followed were worse than the battle. The screaming violence of the assault was replaced by a slow, creeping dread that coiled around Oakhaven like a serpent. Kale did not attack. He was patient. He had surrounded them completely, and now he simply waited, letting time and fear do his work for him. The siege had begun. The sounds of the enemy camp became a form of torture. During the day, the rhythmic, Thunderous blows of heavy hammers on wood echoed from the enemy lines, the sound of their doom being constructed. At night, the sky was lit by the glow of 1,000 enemy campfires, a constant, silent reminder that they were trapped, an island of flickering hope in a sea of implacable hate. The whispers started among the villagers, fear, doubt, and the gnawing question of how long their dwindling food and water would last. Evelyn felt the hope of her people fraying with each passing hour. The barricade, now reinforced with Jacob's hastily forged iron plates, looked stronger than ever, but it was a brittle illusion. She and her council knew the truth. The wall was built to stop men, not a monster of wood and iron. The battering ram would shatter their gate like a child's toy. "We cannot wait for them to attack," Evelyn said, her voice low and tense, during a grim meeting in the Great Hall. "Every moment we wait, they grow stronger and we grow weaker. We are letting them choose the time and place of our death." "What choice do we have?" Mason argued, his face etched with worry. "We are blockaded. To go out there is suicide. We must trust in our defenses." "Our defenses will fail, Father," Evelyn countered, her gaze sweeping over the tired faces in the room. "The ram will break our gate, and the horde will pour in. We will be slaughtered." She leaned over the map on the table, a fierce light in her eyes. A hunter does not wait for the bear to come to her cabin. She goes into its territory and sets a trap. She strikes where it is unexpected. Her meaning was terrifyingly clear. "You want to lead a party out there?" Jacob asked, his voice a low rumble of disbelief. "To do what? Fight an army?" "No," Evelyn said, shaking her head. "Not to fight the army. To kill the monster." She pointed a finger at a spot on the map where scouts had reported the ram's construction. "We don't need to defeat the horde. We just need to destroy the ram. If we can burn it before they can use it, we take away their key. We force Kale to reconsider." The plan was insane. A handful of them against thousands. But as the council sat in silence, they realized it was the only plan that offered a sliver of hope. Waiting meant certain death. Attacking was a chance, however slim. Ben, his face now lean and hard from battle, was the first to speak. "I'll go," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You'll need someone who can move quietly." One by one, 4 of her other best hunters volunteered. It was a suicide mission, and they all knew it. Mason looked at his daughter, his heart torn between pride and terror. He saw the unshakable resolve in her eyes and knew he could not stop her. "Then you will not go empty-handed," he said, turning to the blacksmith. "Jacob, we will need fire. Something that will burn hot and fast." For the next 24 hours, a new, secret purpose filled a corner of Oakhaven. While most continued to man the walls, Jacob and his apprentices worked tirelessly, not on weapons, but on clay pots filled with a volatile mixture of animal fat, pitch, and dried moss. They were crude, but they would be devastatingly effective against the dry timber of the ram. On the evening of the planned raid, as the sun began to set, Evelyn went to the glowing oak tree one last time. She felt the crushing weight of the lives she held in her hands. She placed her palm against the cool, glowing bark and closed her eyes, not in prayer, but in a moment of quiet focus, drawing strength from its silent presence. When she opened her eyes, she saw something nestled at the base of the tree, lying on a patch of moss. It was a single, large feather, as long as her forearm. It was a soft, shimmering white, shot through with threads of pure silver that seemed to capture and reflect the tree's blue light. It was no feather from any bird she knew. It was otherworldly, beautiful, and impossible. She picked it up, and it was nearly weightless in her hand, yet it felt imbued with a profound sense of purpose. It was a sign, a silent message from Lyra, the battle maiden. It did not offer power or promise victory. It was simply an acknowledgement, a whisper across worlds that said, "Courage is the right path." A newfound calm settled over her. She tucked the silver-white feather securely into her quiver. Her fear was not gone, but her doubt was. As true darkness fell, her small team of 6 gathered at a quiet, shadowed section of the barricade. They were ghosts in the night, their faces darkened with soot, their movements silent and fluid. They exchanged quiet nods with their loved ones, words being too heavy for the moment. Mason hugged Evelyn tightly, his whisper a raw plea in her ear. "Come back." "I will," she whispered back, her voice a promise she prayed she could keep. With one last look at the comforting blue glow of their home, Evelyn and her team slipped over the wall. They dissolved into the oppressive darkness of the no-man's land between the barricade and the enemy lines. The whispering siege was about to be answered by a roar of defiance, and the fate of Oakhaven now rested on 6 shadows moving silently through the night. The world beyond Oakhaven's walls was a hostile, alien landscape. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every rustle of leaves sounded like an approaching patrol. Evelyn and her small team moved through the darkness with the patience of predators, their senses strained to the breaking point. The weight of the clay pots filled with Jacob's flammable mixture was a heavy, sloshing burden, a constant reminder of their desperate purpose. They were 6 whispers of defiance against a sleeping giant. Evelyn led the way, her hunter's instincts her only guide. She read the trampled earth, the subtle shifts in the wind, and the patterns of the distant sentry fires. She guided her team through forgotten game trails and shallow ravines, a path that no soldier would ever think to guard. Twice they froze, melting into the undergrowth as enemy patrols passed, so close they could smell the stale sweat of their leather armor. Each time, they waited, hearts hammering against their ribs, until the rhythmic tramp of boots faded into the distance. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the edge of the Iron Horde's main encampment. It was a city of tents and iron, sprawling across the valley. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and simmering violence. Finding a way in seemed impossible, but Cale's arrogance was their greatest ally. He had posted his sentries facing Oakhaven, never imagining a threat could come from within his own disciplined lines. Evelyn found what she was looking for, a sanitation trench being dug at the far edge of the camp, a place of shadow and neglect. It was their way in. They slipped into the camp like ghosts, moving between the rows of sleeping tents. The sounds were unnervingly intimate, the snores and sleep-muttered curses of thousands of soldiers, the soft clink of a guard shifting his weight. Every step was a gamble, every shadow a potential enemy. They followed the massive, churned tracks in the dirt that led from the forest to the center of the camp, the birthplace of their greatest fear. And then they saw it. The battering ram was a beast of nightmare proportions, even more monstrous up close. It rested in a clearing, its massive oak beam, as thick as 3 men, capped with a snarling, demonic head of black iron. It was suspended by chains within a colossal wooden frame on wheels, a mobile engine of pure destruction. As predicted, it was only lightly guarded, for soldiers stood watch, their postures lazy, their attention drifting. They were deep in the heart of their own army. What threat could there possibly be? The team communicated with silent hand signals they had practiced for years. 2 of the hunters, the best archers after Evelyn, melted into the shadows on opposite sides of the clearing. Evelyn gave a subtle nod. 2 bowstrings sang a near-silent song. The guards at the front of the ram crumpled without a sound, arrows protruding from their throats. Before the other 2 guards could even register what had happened, 2 more arrows found their mark. The beast was unprotected. "Go," Evelyn mouthed. They moved with frantic, silent efficiency. Ben and another hunter placed their heavy clay pots at the base of the frame, wedging them against the main support beams and the axles of the wheels. Evelyn and the others carefully placed theirs along the top of the massive central log. They worked with practiced speed, their hands moving surely in the dim light of the distant fires. They were just placing the last pot when disaster struck. A loud, boisterous laugh echoed from the edge of the clearing. A patrol, returning early from their rounds, was approaching. In seconds, they would be upon them. There was no time to hide, no time for quiet escape. Their eyes met in the darkness, and a single, desperate understanding passed between them. "Light them," Evelyn hissed, her voice a sharp, urgent whisper. Now, there was no more stealth. They tore the oil-soaked rags from their pouches, lit them with flint and steel, and touched the flames to the long fuses protruding from the pots. The fuses caught instantly, sputtering and hissing as they raced toward their volatile contents. The returning patrols saw them then, their shouts of alarm cutting through the night. Intruders, sabotage. But it was too late. The first pot exploded with a dull humph, shattering and spraying its sticky, burning contents across the dry wood. A second later, the others followed, and the battering ram was engulfed in a sudden, roaring inferno. The fire, fed by the pitch and fat, burned with an unnatural hunger, climbing the wooden frame in seconds. The night was torn apart by a massive pillar of orange flame that lit up the entire camp, turning midnight into a hellish, flickering dawn. The roar of the fire was immediately followed by the roar of the awakening army. War horns blared, not with the cold menace of an attack, but with the frantic, chaotic notes of alarm. Thousands of soldiers, startled from their sleep, began to pour out of their tents, shouting in confusion and rage. Evelyn and her team stood for a single, frozen moment, bathed in the light of their magnificent destruction. The ram, their village's death sentence, was a funeral pyre. The mission was a success, but they were standing in a small circle of light in the very heart of an enraged hornet's nest. All around them, a sea of iron and fury was closing in. Their escape route was gone. Their desperate whisper of defiance had become a roar of fire, and now they had to face the storm it had unleashed. For a single, breathtaking moment, the world was nothing but the roar and the heat of the fire. The battering ram, Kale's monstrous key to Oakhaven's destruction, was a colossal torch, casting wild, dancing shadows across the panicked camp. Then, the spell of the moment shattered, and the world became a maelstrom of screaming men and blaring war horns. Scatter. To the river. Evelyn's voice sliced through the chaos, a commander's sharp command in the heart of the storm. Go. There was no coordinated plan, no elegant strategy. There was only survival. Her team broke apart, 5 shadows darting in different directions, their goal not to fight, but to evade, to use the pandemonium they had created as their shield. Evelyn grabbed Ben's arm, pulling him into the deep shadow between 2 large tents. An Iron Horde soldier, his face wild with sleep and confusion, stumbled out directly in front of them. Before he could even raise his sword, Evelyn's knife flashed, and the man fell. They ran. The camp was a labyrinth of chaos. They knocked over tables, kicked braziers of hot coals into campus tents, and did anything they could to add to the confusion, to create more obstacles between themselves and the growing wave of soldiers behind them. The air was thick with smoke and the enraged shouts of an army that had been made to look like fools. From the center of the camp, a single voice, cold and filled with absolute fury, cut through the noise. Alive. I want them alive. Evelyn risked a glance over her shoulder, and her blood ran cold. Kale himself had emerged from his command tent. He was bare-chested, having had no time for armor, but he held a massive, double-bladed axe in one hand. His eyes, burning with a cold fire, scanned the chaos and locked directly onto her. He saw her, and with a guttural roar, he began to move in her direction, soldiers parting before him like water before a rock. He was not just a commander, he was a predator, and he was hunting them himself. They were running out of time and space. The pursuit was closing in. It was then that one of Evelyn's hunters, a quiet man named Marcus, found his path blocked by a wall of soldiers. He was cornered. He looked back, met Evelyn's desperate eyes for a fraction of a second, and gave her a grim, determined nod. He did not try to flee. Instead, he let out a great war cry and charged directly into the group of soldiers, his 2 short swords a blur of motion. He was hopelessly outnumbered, but his sudden, suicidal attack created the one thing they needed most: a momentary distraction. The soldiers surrounding them faltered, turning to deal with this new, immediate threat. Go! For Oakhaven was the last thing they heard him shout before he was overwhelmed. The sacrifice bought them precious seconds. Evelyn, Ben, and the other 3 survivors sprinted for the edge of the camp, the sounds of Marcus's last stand a fresh wound in their hearts. But Kale was relentless. He ignored the skirmish and kept coming, his massive strides eating up the ground between them. They could hear his harsh, ragged breathing. He was almost upon them. They were at the edge of the camp, the dark, swirling water of the Serpent's River just visible through the last line of tents. But a solid line of Kale's personal guard, drawn by his pursuit, moved to block their path. They were trapped. Kale was behind them, his guards before them. It was the end. Desperation took over. Evelyn spun around to face the pursuing warlord, knocking an arrow to her bow. This was it. One final, futile shot. As she drew the string back, her fingers brushed against the object she had tucked into her quiver, the silver-white feather. The moment her skin touched it, a soft, ethereal light flared in the darkness. The feather, a silent promise from Lyra, seemed to pulse with a cool, starlight energy. The light flowed from the feather, up her arm, and into the arrow nocked on her string. The simple wooden shaft and flint arrowhead were suddenly bathed in a brilliant, silver-white luminescence. Kale hesitated for a split second, his eyes widening at the impossible light. That was all the time she needed. Evelyn released the bowstring. The arrow did not fly. It erupted. It left her bow not as a shaft of wood, but as a bolt of pure, white light, crossing the distance between them in the blink of an eye. It did not strike Kale. It struck the ground at his feet. The impact was silent, but it unleashed a blinding flash of silver-white light, as if a star had just been born and died on the spot. Kale and his guards cried out, throwing their arms up to shield their eyes from the sudden, overwhelming brilliance. They were momentarily blinded, stumbling back in confusion.
Now,
Evelyn screamed. Using the precious seconds the miracle had bought them, she and the other 4 survivors crashed through the disoriented line of guards. They didn't stop running until they reached the riverbank and threw themselves into the churning, icy water. The cold was a brutal shock, but it was a welcome one. It washed away the sweat and the blood, and the current immediately grabbed them, pulling them downstream, away from the chaos of the camp. They surfaced, gasping for air, and looked back. The night sky was dominated by the towering pillar of fire that was once Kale's battering ram. The entire enemy camp was a scene of chaos, its rage and fury muted by their distance and the rushing of the river. They had done it. They had succeeded. But as the 5 of them clung to a piece of driftwood, being carried by the current into the darkness, the victory felt heavy. They were alive, but they had lost one of their own, and the fury they had awakened in their enemy would be terrible indeed. The Serpent's River was a torrent of black, icy water that stole their breath and leached the warmth from their bones. The fire and fury of the Iron Horde's camp faded behind them, replaced by the roar of the current and the desperate struggle to stay afloat. They were 5 ghosts being carried away by the river, clinging to a large, uprooted log, their bodies numb, their minds reeling from the violent whiplash of their mission. The adrenaline that had fueled their flight was gone, leaving only a profound, shaking exhaustion. After what seemed like an age, the current slackened as the river widened, and they managed to guide their makeshift raft toward the southern bank. They crawled out of the water, collapsing onto the muddy shore, their shivering bodies a testament to their ordeal. For several minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were their own ragged, gasping breaths and the gentle lapping of the river. They were alive. They were free, but the victory felt hollow, haunted by the ghost of the man they had left behind. Evelyn pushed herself up, her limbs heavy as stone. She looked at the 4 faces illuminated by the pale moonlight, bruised, cut, and etched with a shared trauma. "Marcus," she said, her voice rough and quiet. "He saved us. We don't leave his memory here. We carry it home with us. It will be the strength in our arms in the next fight." Ben slammed a fist into the wet mud, a single, violent sound in the stillness. "They will pay for that," he growled, his voice thick with a mixture of grief and rage. "I swear it." "They will," Evelyn promised, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "But not tonight. Tonight we survive." As they huddled together for warmth, their eyes were drawn back toward the enemy camp, now miles upstream. The massive fire from the ram had died down to a deep, angry red glow, like the smoldering heart of a volcano. But a new sound began to drift across the water, a sound far more terrifying than the chaotic alarms from before.
Clang, clang, clang.
It was the sound of a hammer striking an anvil. Not one, but hundreds, perhaps thousands. It was a rhythmic, relentless, pounding beat that spoke not of retreat or defeat, but of furious, obsessive work. The sound was filled with rage, a promise of retribution being forged in the heart of the enemy camp. A cold dread settled in Evelyn's stomach, heavier than the river's chill. "He's not retreating," she whispered, the realization dawning on her. "He's not rebuilding the ram." "What is he doing?" one of the hunters asked, his voice trembling. "He's making weapons," Evelyn answered grimly. "Swords, axes, spearheads. He's arming every last man for a different kind of war. We didn't just wound his army. We wounded his pride. He's not going to try to break down our door anymore. He's going to burn our house to the ground with us inside it." The sound of those distant, furious forges became the new heartbeat of their fear. Their single act of defiance had not saved them. It had merely escalated the conflict into something far more personal and brutal. The journey back was a waking nightmare. They were on the wrong side of the river, miles from home, with enemy patrols now swarming the woods with a renewed, vengeful purpose. They moved in short, desperate bursts, hiding by day and traveling by the dim light of the moon. They were hunters, and they used every ounce of their skill to survive. reading tracks, silencing their footsteps, and finding sustenance in edible roots and clean water from hidden streams. On the second night, as they took shelter in a rocky crevice, exhaustion finally threatened to overwhelm Evelyn. Her wounds ached, her mind was numb with grief and the immense pressure of command. She felt her resolve begin to fray. Leaning her head back against the cold stone, she looked up at the star-dusted sky. As she watched, she thought she saw something impossible. A flicker of movement in the heavens, faster than any bird. For a fleeting moment, a constellation of faint, shimmering stars seemed to take the shape of a winged rider on a steed of light, galloping across the celestial ocean. And on the wind, she heard it again, a single, impossibly pure note from a crystal bell, a faint echo of the melody that had first summoned Lyra. It was not a vision of power or a promise of aid. It was a reminder that her struggle, their struggle, was seen. That even in this dark, desperate corner of the world, they were not entirely alone. The small, private miracle was just enough. A sliver of strength returned to her limbs, a touch of steel to her spine. The next evening, they finally saw it. Through a break in the trees, a familiar, gentle blue light pulsed in the distance. The magical oak. Home. The sight was so beautiful, so overwhelming, that it brought tears to their eyes. They stumbled the last mile, their bodies screaming in protest, driven only by the sight of that light. A lookout on the Oakhaven walls spotted their ragged forms emerging from the treeline. A cry went up, a mixture of shock, confusion, and overwhelming relief. The gate, which had been sealed shut for days, was unbarred to let them in. They were home. They had returned not as triumphant heroes, but as wounded survivors, their numbers lessened, their faces haunted. They brought back the victory of a single burn machine, but they also brought with them the heavy knowledge of Marcus's sacrifice and the chilling, echoing sound of 1,000 hammers, forging a new and more terrible war in the darkness. The return of the 5 survivors was met with a surge of joyous, disbelieving cheers. The people of Oakhaven poured into the square, their faces illuminated by the magical oak's blue light, hope rekindled in their hearts. They had spent 2 agonizing days watching the distant glow of the fire, praying for a miracle. Seeing Evelyn and the others, battered and bruised but alive, felt like an answer to those prayers. They crowded around the survivors, clapping them on the back, their voices a cacophony of relief. The celebration, however, was tragically short-lived. As the crowd pressed in, their joy turned to questioning silence when they realized that only 5 had returned. A woman near the front, Marcus's wife, looked at Evelyn, her eyes wide with a dawning, terrible question that she couldn't bring herself to ask. Evelyn, leaning on Ben for support, raised a weary hand for silence. The square quieted, the weight of the unspoken question hanging in the air. "The ram is destroyed," Evelyn announced, her voice hoarse but clear. "Kale's greatest weapon is a pile of ash." A ragged cheer went up, but she immediately silenced it. "We paid a heavy price for this victory. Marcus, he gave his life so that we could escape. He fought with the heart of a lion and saved us all. We owe him a debt that can never be repaid." A wave of grief washed through the crowd, extinguishing the brief flicker of triumph. The celebration dissolved into a somber, respectful silence as the villagers parted to let Marcus's family through, their private sorrow becoming a shared burden for the entire town. The victory was real, but its taste was as bitter as ash. Despite her bone-deep exhaustion, Evelyn knew they had no time to mourn. She called an immediate council, gathering Mason, Jacob, and the other town leaders in the Great Hall. The survivors stood before them, their faces grim. "Tell us everything," Mason urged. Evelyn described their infiltration, the destruction of the ram, and their desperate escape. But she saved the most important detail for last. "As we left," she said, her voice low and serious, "the entire camp was put to work. We heard thousands of hammers on thousands of anvils. The sound carried for miles." Jacob the blacksmith frowned, wiping a soot-stained hand on his leather apron. "They are not forging armor," he grunted. "That's a specialized job. A sound like that, it's the sound of weapons. Simple, brutal weapons. And a lot of them." The grim reality settled over the room. "He's not retreating," Evelyn confirmed their fears. "He's rearming. He's done with tactics and siege engines. He failed to break our wall, so now he intends to overwhelm us. He's coming with everything he has in a single, all-out assault." a wave of pure hate. This news shattered the town's fragile morale. The old fears returned with a vengeance. An elder, his voice trembling, stood up. The ram is gone. This is our chance. We must flee now while we can. We can slip away into the northern woods. We can't win this fight. A murmur of frightened agreement spread. Even Mason looked at Evelyn, his eyes pleading. Daughter, he's right. You've won us a chance to escape. Let's take it. Let's save who we can. Evelyn looked at her father, at the terrified faces of the elders, and then at the hard, determined faces of the survivors who had stood with her in the enemy camp. She straightened up, the weariness falling away from her like a cloak, replaced by the unshakable authority of a true commander. No, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. We cannot outrun the Iron Horde. Fleeing means being hunted down in the open, one by one, without walls, without the light of the oak, without hope. Marcus did not die to give us a chance to run. He died to give us a chance to win. She stepped forward, her gaze locking with every person in the room. We have one advantage left. This is our home. We know every building, every alley, every stone. We will not wait for Kale's storm to break against our wall. We will let it break, and then we will fight them in the streets. We will turn our entire village into a fortress, a death trap of our own making. We will make them pay for every inch of ground and blood. We stand here, together, or we die out there alone. Her words, forged not in hope but in grim, hardened steel, silenced all dissent. The fear was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a fatalistic resolve. There would be no more running. The next day, Oakhaven was transformed. The work was no longer about reinforcing the outer wall, but about fortifying the village itself. Doors were barricaded, windows were boarded up, and crude, narrow passages were created between buildings, perfect for ambushes. Furniture and wagons were overturned to create secondary barricades in the streets. Every home became a miniature fortress. That evening, Evelyn walked through the transformed village, the weight of her decision heavy on her soul. She stopped by the home of Marcus's widow and sat with her in silence for a long time, offering no easy words of comfort, only a shared presence in grief. Later, she stood alone before the oak tree, its light a soothing presence. She pulled the silver-white feather from her quiver. It still held a faint, otherworldly shimmer. She didn't ask it for another miracle. She didn't pray for an easy victory. She simply held it, drawing strength from the memory of the courage and sacrifice it represented. The magic was a part of their story, but the ending would be written by their own hands. As dawn broke on the second day, a cry came from the highest lookout post. They're coming! Evelyn rushed to the main barricade. The rhythmic, vengeful clang of hammers from the enemy camp had fallen silent. In its place was the familiar, terrifying tramp of thousands of feet. But this was no disciplined column, no shielded wall. It was a sea of iron, a sprawling, roaring wave of warriors stretching from one end of the valley to the other. They were armed with newly forged, savagely sharp weapons, and their faces were contorted in a unified mask of rage. The storm had finally arrived. There was no strategy to the Iron Horde's final assault, only pure, unrestrained fury. They came not as a disciplined army, but as a tsunami of steel and rage, a red wave of vengeance that crashed against Oakhaven's main barricade. The defenders let loose a volley of arrows, felling the first rank of attackers, but it was like throwing pebbles into a tidal wave. The sheer, overwhelming weight of the horde smashed into the wall. Timbers that had withstood the first assault now groaned, splintered, and shattered. Jacob's iron reinforcements buckled under the relentless pressure. With a final, deafening crack, the main gate and a large section of the barricade disintegrated, and the Iron Horde poured through the breach, their triumphant roars echoing through the village. They expected to find a terrified populace to slaughter. They expected a swift, brutal end. They were wrong. The first warriors through the gap found themselves not in an open square, but in a narrow, deadly channel. Wagons and debris had been arranged to funnel them into a bottleneck. As they pushed forward, confused by the unexpected obstacle, Evelyn's signal horn blew a sharp, clear note from the roof of the Great Hall. The trap was sprung. From the rooftops, from boarded-up windows on both sides of the street, a storm of arrows and stones rained down upon the tightly packed invaders. The cheering of the horde turned to screams of pain and confusion. Their greatest strength, their numbers, had become their greatest weakness, clogging the street and making them easy targets. The front of the wave faltered, bodies piling up, creating a grim, new barricade of their own dead. The battle for Oakhaven had begun, not at its walls, but in its heart. It was a chaotic, brutal street fight. Jacob the blacksmith stood like a stone titan at the head of the main street leading to the square. His massive hammer rose and fell, a force of nature against the tide of iron. Each swing sent soldiers flying, their shields and helmets crumpling like paper. He was a one-man defensive line, buying precious time for the archers above. Then, his face a grim mask of determination, led a small, fast-moving band of fighters through the winding back alleys. They were ghosts in the chaos, striking from the shadows, downing a small group of soldiers with swift, coordinated attacks, and then melting away into another alley before the enemy could react. The scared farmer was gone, replaced by a hardened guerrilla fighter who used his knowledge of his home as a weapon. From her command post on the roof, Evelyn was the eyes of the defense. She saw the flow of the battle, the points where the enemy was concentrating their forces, the areas where her own defenders were faltering. Her horn calls directed the flow of the fight, sending reinforcements to a buckling line or signaling an ambush. Her bow was never still. She moved along the rooftop, her arrows flying with deadly purpose, picking off enemy officers, silencing archers, and sowing chaos in the enemy ranks. Every arrow was a carefully chosen word in the violent poetry of the battle. But the Iron Horde was a beast of 1,000 heads. For every one they cut down, 2 more surged forward, driven by a relentless fury. Fires began to catch, smoke filling the streets and making the scene a vision of hell. The defenders were fighting with the courage of cornered lions, but they were bleeding, tiring, and dying. Then a new, more terrifying roar cut through the din kale. Enraged by the dishonorable resistance of this backwater village, finally entered the fray. He was a whirlwind of destruction. His massive, twin-bladed axe was a blur, cleaving through the makeshift barricades as if they were kindling, sending defenders flying with every swing. He didn't bother with tactics. He was pure, focused destruction, and his presence inspired a fresh, savage surge from his warriors. He ignored the skirmishes in the side streets, his cold eyes fixed on a single objective that glowed with a soft, blue light at the heart of the village. He had seen its power. He knew it was the source of their unnatural defiance. He would not just conquer this village, he would extinguish its very soul. He and his elite personal guard smashed their way down the main street, the defenders unable to stop their advance. Jacob, bloodied and exhausted, was thrown aside by the force of Kale's charge. The path to the town square was clear. From her rooftop vantage point, Evelyn saw Kale's objective and her heart froze. He was heading for the oak. The final battle was not for the walls or the streets. It was for the tree. It was for the light. She ran along the rooftops, leaping across the gaps between buildings, desperation giving her speed. Below her, Kale and his guards stormed into the square, cutting down the few defenders who stood in their way. He came to a stop at the base of the ancient, glowing tree, its serene blue light washing over his blood-splattered armor. The battle still raged throughout the rest of Oakhaven, but here, in the square, a tense, terrible silence fell. Kale raised his massive axe high above his head, its polished blades reflecting the tree's mystical light. He let out a triumphant roar, preparing to bring it down and sever the connection between this land and its magic forever. Evelyn reached the edge of the roof, directly overlooking the square. She dropped to one knee, drawing an arrow and knocking it in a single, fluid motion. The world narrowed. There was only the hateful figure of the warlord, the sacred tree, and the arrow on her string. The fate of her home, her people, and their light all came down to this one, impossible shot. Time stretched and thinned until it was as taut as Evelyn's bowstring. In the heart of a raging battle, the town square became a pocket of absolute silence, a frozen tableau. There was only the warlord, a monument of hate with his axe raised high, the ancient oak, a serene beacon of life, and the lone hunter on the roof, the fate of her world resting on a single, slender shaft of ash and flint. As Evelyn took her final, steadying breath, her fingers brushed against the silver-white feather in her quiver. A familiar, cool energy pulsed against her skin, a silent acknowledgement from a world beyond. The light was not for her eyes, but for her soul. It flowed into her, not as a wave of strength, but as a moment of perfect, preternatural clarity. In that instant, She was not a scared girl defending her home. She was an instrument of fate. She released the string. The arrow did not just fly, it blazed. It left the bow as a streak of silver-white light, a tiny comet screaming through the smoky air. Kale, in his moment of triumph, saw the flash of light and sneered, his massive arm beginning its downward swing. He was a demigod of war, clad in impenetrable iron. What was one more arrow to him? He did not try to block it. The arrow crossed the square and struck him high on his right shoulder, the side bearing the weight of the axe. It hit a point no mortal archer could have aimed for, a tiny, flexible joint in the thick plate armor. The impact itself was not enough to fell a man of his size. But this was no ordinary arrow. A brilliant flash of blue-white light erupted from the point of impact. Kale roared, not just in pain, but in sheer shock. A wave of numbing, celestial cold, utterly alien to the heat of battle, shot through his arm. His muscles seized, his grip went slack, and the massive, twin-bladed axe tumbled from his grasp. It fell to the ground with a deafening clang, its wicked blade burying itself in the dirt, inches from the ancient roots of the oak tree. The tree was unharmed. For a moment, Kale stood stunned, staring at the glowing, otherworldly arrow shaft protruding from his armor. Then, his shock curdled into an absolute, volcanic fury. He had been denied his prize by this insect, this hunter girl. With a scream that was pure, animalistic rage, he grabbed the arrow's shaft and ripped it from his shoulder, ignoring the shriek of metal and the fresh gush of blood. He turned his burning, hate-filled eyes upward toward the rooftop. The tree was forgotten. The battle was forgotten. His world had narrowed to a single, all-consuming objective, the annihilation of the woman who had dared to defy him. He drew a monstrously large broadsword from the sheath on his back, its polished steel thirsty for blood. "You," he bellowed, his voice a promise of a slow and painful death. His elite guards, shaking off their surprise, began to advance toward the building Evelyn was on. Evelyn dropped her bow and slid down a rain-slick support beam, landing lightly on her feet in the square. She was armed now with only a long hunting knife. As Kale's guards moved to surround her, a sound like a thunderclap echoed from the main street. Jacob, the blacksmith, his face a mask of bloody determination, charged into the square. He was battered, wounded, but unbroken. "This is her fight," he roared, swinging his massive smithing hammer in a great, sweeping arc that sent 2 guards flying. He planted himself between Evelyn and the guards, a wall of pure, stubborn loyalty. "You'll have to get through me first." Kale didn't even glance at them. His entire focus was on Evelyn. He began to advance on her, his sword held low, his wounded shoulder barely slowing him. "I will break you," he snarled. "I will break your body, and then I will break your spirit, and then I will burn this pathetic tree with your bones." The duel began. It was a terrifyingly mismatched contest. Kale was a cyclone of steel, his broadsword scything through the air with enough force to shatter stone. Evelyn was a leaf in the wind. She could not, try to meet his blows. She danced, she weaved, she dodged. Her every movement was a desperate gamble, her hunter's agility the only thing keeping her alive. The edge of his blade missed her by inches, carving deep gouges in the flagstones where she had been a second before. She was not fighting to win. She was fighting to survive, waiting for the one opening that she knew must eventually come. Kale, his rage overriding his discipline, grew more and more frustrated. He was a god of battle, and this lithe, untouchable mortal was making a mockery of his power. He roared in frustration and lunged forward, putting all of his weight and strength into a single, massive, overhand swing meant to cleave her in 2. This was it. This was the moment. Instead of leaping backward, Evelyn did the one thing he would never expect. She darted forward, under the arc of his descending sword. For a fraction of a second, she was inside his guard, too close for his long blade to touch her. His wounded arm, slowed by the magical arrow, made his recovery a fraction too slow. His eyes widened in surprise. She was a whisper of steel against his wall of iron. Her hand, holding the hunting knife her father had given her, shot upward. She did not aim for the thick breastplate or the armored pauldrons. She aimed for the small, vulnerable gap under his arm, where the armor had to flex to allow for movement. The chapter would close with her plunging the knife upwards, aiming for a weak point in the armor under his arm, a whisper of steel against a titan of iron. The outcome, whether the blow is successful, whether it is fatal, would be left unresolved. The world contracted to the space of a single, desperate heartbeat. Evelyn's knife, a simple tool of a hunter, met the vulnerable gap in Kale's armor. There was a moment of soft resistance from the thick leather gambeson beneath the steel plate, and then the blade slid home, a whisper of steel burying itself to the hilt. It was a shockingly intimate act of violence, quiet and brutal, lost in the greater din of the battle. Kale froze. The unstoppable force of nature, the conqueror of a dozen lands, shuddered to a halt. A look of profound, utter disbelief washed over his face. He didn't roar. He didn't curse. He slowly looked down, not at Evelyn, but at the simple, familiar hilt of the hunting knife protruding from beneath his arm. It was such a small thing to bring an end to such a monumental life. A quiet, surprised grunt escaped his lips, a puff of air that was his last act of command. His massive broadsword, which had seemed just moments before to be an extension of his own arm, slipped from his gauntlet and clattered onto the flagstones. His eyes, which had burned with such cold, intelligent fury, glazed over. His knees buckled. With the slow, grinding finality of a great tree falling in an ancient forest, Kale, the warlord of the Iron Horde, crashed to the ground. The earth of Oakhaven Square, the land he had come to erase, was the last thing he would ever touch. The fall of the Titan sent a ripple of pure shock across the entire battlefield. The fighting, which had been a chaotic symphony of violence, faltered into a stunned, discordant silence. Kale's elite guards, locked in a brutal struggle with Jacob, stopped mid-swing, their faces masks of horror as they stared at the body of their fallen leader. In the blood-soaked streets and alleys, Iron Horde soldiers and Oakhaven defenders alike lowered their weapons, drawn by the sudden, unnatural quiet, their eyes turning toward the square. For a single, breathless moment, the entire war held its breath. Evelyn stood over Kale's body, her chest heaving, her arm trembling from the force of the final blow. She was spattered with his blood, the enormity of her act threatening to overwhelm her. But the hunter's instinct, the commander's will that had been forged in the crucible of this conflict, took over. She could not falter now. With a surge of adrenaline, she bent down and wrapped her hands around the hilt of Kale's fallen broadsword. The weapon was monstrously heavy, a testament to the creature who had wielded it. With a guttural cry of exertion, she lifted it high into the air, its blood-stained blade catching the eerie blue light of the magical oak. Kale is dead. Her voice, raw and powerful, shattered the silence, echoing through every street and alley of Oakhaven. Their leader has fallen. The Horde is broken. Drive them from our home. Her cry was the spark that ignited a firestorm. The spell of silence was broken. For the defenders of Oakhaven, the sight of their hunter leader holding the enemy's sword over his dead body was a miracle more potent than any pulse of magical light. A wave of renewed, ferocious courage surged through them. With a unified roar of triumph and rage, they threw themselves back into the fight. For the soldiers of the Iron Horde, the sight was a death blow to their spirit. Their entire world, their discipline, their strength, was built upon the godlike, invincible figure of Kale. With him gone, their brutal certainty shattered, replaced by disbelief, then fear, then outright panic. They were no longer an army. They were a headless beast, trapped deep within a maze of death. The battle became a rout. The invaders, who had fought with such savage discipline, now scrambled to escape, desperate to flee the village that had become their graveyard. But there was no easy escape. The same barricades and kill zones that had been designed to stop their advance now hindered their retreat. The people of Oakhaven, now the hunters, harried them from rooftops and alleys, their makeshift weapons finally tasting true victory. Back in the square, the fighting was over. Jacob, leaning heavily on his hammer, limped toward Evelyn. Ben and other survivors began to emerge from the side streets, their weary faces a mixture of awe and disbelief as they stared at the fallen warlord. The magical oak tree seemed to pulse with a warm, gentle rhythm, its light soft and soothing. Evelyn let the impossibly heavy broadsword fall from her numb fingers. The sound of battle was fading, replaced by the shouts of victory and the painful cries of the wounded. She had done it. She had slain the monster that had come to devour their world. But as she looked down at her own hands, stained and trembling, she felt no triumph, only a vast, hollow exhaustion. The fall of a Titan had saved them, but the silence he left behind was filled with the ghosts of everyone they had lost. The fires of battle died down, leaving behind the smoldering embers of Oakhaven. As the sun began to rise, its pale light filtered through a thick haze of smoke, illuminating a scene of utter devastation. The sounds of victory had faded, replaced by a new, more somber symphony. The groans of the wounded, the soft weeping of those who had lost loved ones, and the weary, hollow-eyed silence of the survivors. Their home was saved, but it was a ruin, scarred by the terrible price of that salvation. The people of Oakhaven began to emerge from the fortified houses and alleys, their faces smudged with soot and grief. They looked at the bodies of their friends and neighbors lying beside the armored corpses of their enemies. Then, they looked to the square, to the woman standing over the body of the fallen warlord, and their expressions shifted to one of profound, reverent awe. Evelyn, however, felt nothing of the hero. She felt only the crushing weight of every life that had been lost. Her father, Mason, was the first to reach her side. He didn't speak. He simply wrapped his arms around his daughter, a gesture of overwhelming pride, relief, and shared sorrow. "Your mother would have been so proud," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The embrace steadied her, pulling her back from the edge of the abyss of exhaustion. She was not just a warrior. She was a leader, and her work was not done. She gently pulled away from her father. "We have to put out the fires," she said, her voice finding its strength again. "Find the wounded, every one of them. We count our dead later. Right now, we save the living." Her clear, practical commands cut through the days of the survivors, giving them purpose. Small groups began to organize, their movements slow and pained, but filled with a renewed will. It was then that a commotion from the broken main gate drew everyone's attention. A group of villagers, led by a rage-filled Ben, was dragging a captive into the square. The man was an Iron Horde officer, his fine armor dented but intact, his face a mask of defiant pride despite the blood trickling from his temple. "We found him trying to rally a group to stand and fight," Ben snarled, throwing the man to the ground at Evelyn's feet. He was one of Kale's inner circle. A vengeful, ugly mood swept through the crowd. "A life for a life," someone shouted. "Make him pay for what they did." The cry was taken up by others, their grief and rage coalescing into a single, bloodthirsty demand for retribution. They began to press forward, their hands reaching for stones and discarded weapons. "No!" Evelyn's voice cut through the mob like a whip. She stepped between the crowd and the prisoner, her body a shield. "Stop. Look at yourselves. We are not them. We do not butcher helpless prisoners. Is this what we fought for? To become the monsters we defeated?" Her words, and the sheer force of her authority, stopped them. The anger in their eyes was replaced by shame. Ben looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "Take him to the Great Hall," Evelyn commanded 2 of her hunters. "Bind him, give him water, but do not harm him. I will question him myself." Later, in the damaged but still standing Great Hall, Evelyn faced the prisoner. The officer, whose name was Malek, sneered at her. "The little hunter queen," he spat. "Enjoy your victory. It will be the last thing this pathetic village ever knows." Evelyn ignored his taunts. She pulled up a chair and sat down, her movements calm and deliberate. She did not threaten him. She did not lay a hand on him. She simply watched him, her green eyes piercing and intelligent, like a predator studying its prey. "You are a commander," she began, her voice quiet. "You understand strategy, so you must know that your army is broken. Your leader is dead. Why would you try to rally men for a fight that was already lost?" Malek laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think this is over? You think killing Kale wins you the war? You foolish girl. You haven't won a war. You've just sounded a dinner bell." A cold knot tightened in Evelyn's stomach. "What do you mean?" Malek leaned forward, his eyes burning with a fanatic's light. "Kale was a force of nature, yes, but even a hurricane is just weather. It is not the sky. Kale was but one fist of a much larger body. An empire that is rising in the south, an empire that will sweep this entire continent clean. He was sent to tame these northern lands. His death will not be seen as a defeat. It will be seen as an insult." The implications of his words descended on the hall like a shroud. Mason, who had been standing in the corner, took a step forward, his face pale. Malek smiled, a cruel, triumphant expression. "We were the Iron Horde, the army that is coming to avenge him. They are the Legion. They will send a force that makes our army look like a child's collection of toys. They will not just burn your village. They will salt the earth so that nothing ever grows here again. You haven't saved your home, Hunter Queen. You have merely signed its death warrant in the blood of my commander." The brief, fragile sense of victory that had flickered in Oakhaven was extinguished, replaced by a dread far colder and deeper than anything they had felt before. That night, Evelyn stood alone before the oak tree. Its light felt less like a beacon of hope and more like a solitary candle in an encroaching, infinite darkness. The faces of her people, the cost of the battle, the sacrifice of Marcus, all weighed on her. And now this new, impossible knowledge. They had fought a monster, only to learn it was merely the child of a much greater beast. She looked up at the vast, star-filled sky, feeling small and utterly lost. As she watched, a single star, directly above, seemed to flare with an impossible, silver-white brilliance for just a moment, before returning to its normal state. It was a silent, distant acknowledgement. Lyra was watching, but the celestial sign offered no comfort. It felt less like a promise and more like a warning. The true trial was not over. It had not even begun. The dawn that followed the revelation was colder than any that had come before. The physical work of rebuilding Oakhaven began in earnest, clearing rubble, mending roofs, and digging graves for the fallen. But a spiritual winter had descended upon the village. The survivors moved like automatons, their actions mechanical, their eyes haunted by the shadow of the coming legion. Every swing of a hammer, every stone laid, felt futile, like building a sandcastle in the path of a tidal wave. What was the point of rebuilding a home that was already condemned? This heavy, oppressive despair was a more dangerous enemy than the Iron Horde had ever been. Evelyn felt it coiling around her people, choking the heroic spirit they had fought so hard to discover. She knew that if this fear was allowed to fester, it would destroy them long before any southern army arrived. The truth, as terrible as it was not a burden for her to carry alone. It belonged to everyone. That evening, she called a gathering of every surviving soul in Oakhaven. They assembled in the square, their faces grim in the blue light of the oak. With her father Mason by her side and the captive officer Malik bound and guarded for all to see, Evelyn laid out the stark, unvarnished truth. "We won a great victory," she began, her voice steady. "We defeated a monster and drove his army from our lands. You should all be proud of what you did." She paused, letting the weight of their achievement settle. "But the prisoner has told us what we feared. Kale was not a king. He was a weapon. And the hand that wielded him is now reaching for another. An empire called the Legion is coming. They will not send an army. They will send a nation to crush us." A wave of groans and open despair went through the crowd. The fragile hope they had clung to shattered completely. "Then it was all for nothing," cried one of the elders, his voice cracking with anguish. "Marcus, all of them, they died for nothing. We must leave, abandon this cursed place, and scatter to the winds. It's our only chance." "Flee where?" Another voice shot back, filled with bitter resignation. "There is nowhere to go. If an empire wants you dead, you die. We should stay here. At least we can live our last days in our own homes, on our own land." The village square devolved into a bitter, frightened argument. The community that had been forged into a single, unbreakable will by the siege now threatened to splinter into factions of fear, the runners versus the fatalists. Evelyn let them argue, her heart aching as she watched her people turn on each other. When their voices had reached a fever pitch of desperation, she raised her hand. A sudden, commanding silence fell. "You are both wrong," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Running is a slow death. Waiting is a quick one. You are asking the wrong question. It is not about where we go. It is about who we stand with." She looked out at their confused faces. "Remember the rider who first warned us of the Iron Horde? He came from another town. We are not the only people in the north. Nestled in the Greyfong Mountains, hidden in the western forests, scattered along the northern coast, there are other settlements, other free people. The Legion will not stop with us. We are simply the first tree to feel the axe. But they are coming for the whole forest." A new idea, a new, terrifyingly slim path of hope, began to dawn in the eyes of the villagers. "I will not stay here and wait for the end," Evelyn declared, her voice ringing with a newfound purpose that went beyond mere survival. "And I will not abandon my home. I will ride north. I will carry the news of what is coming. I will take Kale's banner and his sword as proof of the threat, and as proof that this threat can be beaten." I will find these other towns. I will speak to their leaders. I will convince them that a single tree can be felled, but a forest, when it stands together, is unconquerable. She was proposing the impossible, to unite the scattered, independent, and likely distrustful settlements of the North into a single alliance. Her father stepped forward, his face a mixture of terror and immense pride. "You cannot do this alone," he said. "I won't," she replied, her gaze finding Ben in the crowd. Ben, who had survived the river and the flight through fire, stepped forward without a moment's hesitation, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. A silent pledge. 2 of the other raid survivors did the same. "Your place is here, father," Evelyn said, turning to Mason. "They need your wisdom to rebuild. They need a leader to keep the heart of Oakhaven beating while I am gone. You must be their anchor." The decision was made. There were no more arguments. The fear was still present, but it was no longer aimless. It had been channeled into a new, desperate purpose. The next morning, a small party of 4 prepared to leave. They were not refugees fleeing a disaster, but ambassadors carrying a warning. Evelyn, clad in hardened leather armor, strapped Kale's monstrous broadsword to the back of her horse. It was too large to wield, but its power as a symbol was immeasurable. As she mounted, she looked back at her battered home, at the determined faces of her people already working to rebuild the walls, and at the gentle, constant light of the oak. Their fight was here. Hers was now out there, in the vast, unknown wilds of the North. With a final nod to her father, she turned her horse and, with her small council of ravens, rode out through the mended gate, leaving her home behind to try and save it. The lands north of Oakhaven were a different world. The lush, familiar forests gave way to rugged hills, windswept plains, and the looming, gray teeth of the Greyfong Mountains. The air grew thinner and colder. This was a hard, unforgiving land that bred hard, unforgiving people. For 10 days, Evelyn and her small party traveled, their hunting skills keeping them fed, their vigilance keeping them safe. The immense weight of Kale's sword, strapped to Ben's horse, was a constant, heavy reminder of their grim purpose. Finally, following the directions from an old trapper's map, they found what they were looking for. It was not a town nestled in a valley, but a fortress carved into the mountain itself. Stonefall. It was a settlement built for survival, its buildings of gray stone seeming to grow directly from the sheer cliff face. A single, narrow, winding path was the only approach, guarded by watchful sentries with crossbows. There were no welcoming gates, only a massive, iron-banded door that looked like it could withstand a siege for a century. After a tense standoff with the guards, their strange request to speak with the leader was granted, largely due to the sheer, unbelievable size of the sword they carried as proof of their story. They were led into the mountain, through tunnels that opened into a vast, central cavern lit by a great, roaring fire pit. The air was filled with the smell of roasting meat and the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The people of Stonefall were tall and stern, their faces carved with the harsh lines of a difficult life, their eyes missing nothing. They were brought before the Jarl of Stonefall, a man named Theron. He was as much a feature of the mountain as the stone he sat upon. His throne was a massive, uncut boulder, and he himself seemed carved from the same material. A great, gray beard fell to his chest, and his face was a roadmap of old battles and older worries. He looked at Evelyn, a young woman in worn leather armor, with eyes as cold and skeptical as a winter sky. "The guards say you come with a wild tale and a dead man's sword." Theron's voice rumbled, the sound of rocks grinding together. "Speak. My time is not for wasting." Evelyn stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice clear. She told their story. She spoke of the peace of Oakhaven, the arrival of the Iron Horde, and the brutal battle for survival. She spoke of Kale's fall and the terrible revelation of the Legion. Finally, Ben and another hunter unstrapped the massive broadsword and laid it on the stone floor before the Jarl, a tangible piece of the nightmare. "The Legion is coming for all of us," Evelyn concluded, her gaze meeting the Jarl's. "They will not stop at the river. They will not stop at these mountains. I do not come to beg for aid for my village. I come to offer an alliance so that all the free people of the North can stand together and fight for our homes." Theron was silent for a long time, stroking his great beard as he stared at the sword. Then, he let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. "A pretty story, girl," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You tell it well. You say you defeated this southern warlord, but it sounds to me like you kicked a hornet's nest, and now you've come running to us to save you from the swarm." He gestured around the cavern. "Look around you. These mountains are our shield. They have kept us safe for generations while the soft people of the flatlands squabbled and died. The South's problems are its own. Why should I risk the lives of my warriors because a farmer's daughter picked a fight she couldn't win?" "This isn't a fight we picked," Ben interjected, his voice hot with anger. "It came to us." Theron ignored him, his cold eyes still fixed on Evelyn. "For all I know, this is a trick. A clever way to lure my fighters from our walls, leaving Stonefall vulnerable. Your plea is born of desperation, not strength. We have no interest in it." He waved a dismissive hand. "You may have food and a place to rest for the night. In the morning, you will be on your way." The dismissal was absolute. It was a stone wall as impenetrable as the one that surrounded them. Dejected and heartsick, Evelyn and her party were led to a small chamber, the failure of their mission a bitter taste in their mouths. As they were preparing their gear for the next day's departure, a figure appeared in their doorway. It was a young woman, her hair a cascade of fiery red braids, her eyes burning with an intensity that matched her father's, but without the cynical coldness. She was clad in warrior's leathers, a fine steel axe at her hip. "I am Astrid," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "The Jarl's daughter." Evelyn and the others stood, wary. "I heard your story," Astrid continued, her gaze fixed on Evelyn with a look of respect. "My father is a great man. He is a rock. But sometimes, a rock is just a rock. It cannot see the storm gathering on the horizon. He is wrong to send you away." A flicker of hope returned to Evelyn. "I cannot offer you his army," Astrid said regretfully. "His word is law. But not everyone here is as blind as he is. Many of the younger warriors, we hear the whispers on the wind. We see the truth in your words." She stepped forward and pressed a small, carved wooden raven into Evelyn's hand. "Travel east, along the mountain's spine for 3 days. You will find the settlement of Silverwood. They are hunters and foresters, more like your own people. Their leader is a woman named Alara. She may be more willing to listen. Show her this raven. Tell her Astrid of Stonefall sent you. It will prove you are a friend." She paused, her expression hardening with resolve. "I will stay here. I will speak to the warriors. I will make my father see reason. The seed you planted today will not die on stony ground, I promise you." The next morning, as Evelyn and her party rode away from the unyielding fortress of Stonefall, the feeling was not one of complete failure. Jarl Theron had rejected them, but in his daughter, they had found an unexpected and fierce ally. They had not gained an army, but they had lit a small, rebellious spark in the heart of the mountain. Their quest, Evelyn realized, was not just a journey across the land, but a battle to be fought in the hearts and minds of its leaders, one stubborn soul at a time. The journey east from Stonefall was a descent from a world of cold, hard stone into a world of deep, living green. The rugged mountain paths gave way to ancient forests, where giant, silver-barked trees formed a canopy so dense that the sunlight dappled the forest floor in shifting patterns. The air grew warmer, filled with the scent of damp earth and moss. It was a land that felt ancient, serene, and possessed of a quiet, watchful wisdom. This journey felt different. After the encounter with Astrid, Evelyn's party moved not with the desperation of refugees, but with the cautious optimism of ambassadors. After 3 days of travel, they found Silverwood. It was less a village and more a part of the forest itself. There were no walls, no gates. Homes were built into the hollows of colossal trees or nestled amongst their great roots, connected by a network of swinging rope bridges high in the branches. Smoke curled lazily from 100 hidden chimneys, and the sounds were not of a blacksmith's hammer, but of children's laughter and the soft melody of a wooden flute. The people of Silverwood moved with a quiet grace, their clothing the colors of the forest, their eyes wary but curious. They were hunters and foresters, and they regarded Evelyn's party with a careful assessment of those who understood the ways of the wild. Following Astrid's instructions, Evelyn presented the small, carved raven to the first sentry they met. The man's suspicious expression softened immediately into one of respect. Without a word, he led them through the sprawling, three-dimensional village to its heart. There, at the base of the largest silverwood tree, an ancient giant whose branches seemed to touch the sky, sat a woman on a simple, carved wooden chair. This was Alara, the leader of Silverwood. She was not a jarl on a stone throne. Her hair was the color of winter snow, braided with leaves and beads. Her face was a network of fine lines, but her eyes were bright and clear, holding a depth of wisdom that seemed as old as the forest itself. Her authority was not something she commanded. It was a natural aura of serenity and strength that commanded respect from all around her. Astrid of Stonefall sends greetings, Elara said, her voice as calm and clear as a forest stream. It is a rare thing. That fiery girl does not offer her friendship lightly. You must have earned it. Come, tell me what danger is so great that it unites the mountain's child with the hunter of the plains. Encouraged by her warm reception, Evelyn stepped forward. She recounted their story for the third time, but this time it felt different. She was not speaking to a cynical king, but to a wise elder. When she finished, Ben laid Kale's great sword at Alara's feet. The brutal, ugly weapon looked alien and profane lying on the soft moss at the base of the ancient tree. Elara listened to the entire tale without interruption. When Evelyn was done, the wise woman was silent for a long time. She looked at the sword, and a deep, profound sorrow filled her eyes. "We have felt this," she said softly. "Our seers have spoken of a sickness on the wind from the south, a shadow growing long and cold. We did not know its name or what face it wore. You have brought us the terrible truth." She reached out a wrinkled hand and gently touched the hilt of the monstrous sword.
Kale.
"The Legion. Thank you, Evelyn of Oakhaven. Your warning has given a name to our fear, and in naming it, you have given us the first tool to fight it." There was no skepticism, no dismissal. There was only grim, immediate acceptance. "Will you join us?" Evelyn asked, her voice tight with hope. "Will you send your warriors?" "An alliance is the only path forward," Elara agreed without hesitation. But true alliances are not forged by matching strength for strength. Theron of Stonefall has his warriors, men who are like the rock of their mountain. We are not them. We are the trees of this forest. We bend, we watch, and we strike from the shadows. She stood, her small frame possessing a surprising strength. "I will not send you a cohort of axemen to die against the Legion's shields. I will give you something far more valuable. I will give you the eyes and ears of this forest. My best scouts will travel with you to help you find the other settlements and to create a network of communication between us all. I will pledge our healers and their knowledge of the forest's remedies to mend the wounds this war will inflict. And," she said, her eyes gleaming, "I will pledge 100 of the finest archers in the north. The Legion's iron may be thick, but our arrows find the gaps." It was a promise of a different kind of support, a wise strategy that played to their strengths. While in Alara's great lodge, Evelyn noticed a series of ancient tapestries hanging on the walls. They depicted epic scenes from her people's history, and in the skies above the battles, she saw familiar figures, winged female warriors with silver hair, watching over the valiant. "The Sky Sisters," Elara said, noticing her gaze. "The ancient stories say they are the weavers of fate, the guardians who appear only at the turning of the age, when the world's fate hangs in the balance. It has been 1,000 years since anyone has claimed to have seen them." Evelyn thought of Lyra, of the starlight and the impossible arrow, and knew the stories were true. The age had turned. The next morning, Evelyn's party prepared to leave, but they were no longer just four. With them were 2 of Silverwood's master scouts and a messenger carrying Alara's own seal. The endorsement of the wise woman of Silverwood would be a key that could unlock any door in the north. They had left Stonefall with a single, rebellious spark. They now left Silverwood with a brightly burning torch. The scattered threads of the north were finally, slowly, being woven together. Alara of Silverwood's endorsement was not just a key, it was a fire that spread across the north. Armed with her seal and accompanied by her wise scouts, Evelyn's party found that doors that had once been barred by suspicion were now thrown open with respect. The story of Oakhaven's defiance, now validated by the wisest leader in the region, traveled faster than they could ride. Their journey became a mission of unification. They traveled to the windswept coastal towns, where hardy fishermen pledged their fleets to move supplies and warriors along the rivers. They met with the nomadic horse clans of the eastern plains, who promised a cavalry that could strike the enemy's flanks like a bolt of lightning. At each settlement, Evelyn presented Kale's sword, told her story, and offered not a plea for help, but an invitation to stand together. One by one, the scattered, independent peoples of the north chose unity over isolation. As they were making their way back towards the central plains, a rider approached them. bearing the sigil of Stonefall, a stoic mountain carved on a gray banner. It was a messenger from Astrid. Her persistence, bolstered by the news of Alara's alliance, had finally broken through her father's stony pride. Jarl Theron, in a grudging admission of his error, had agreed to march his entire force of elite mountain warriors south. The final, most stubborn piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Through Alara's network of scouts, a message was sent to all the newly allied clans. Oakhaven was too small, too damaged to be the staging ground for such an army. They would make their stand at a more strategic location, a wide, defensible valley known in the old tales as the Eagle's Pass. It was a natural choke point, the only viable path for a massive army marching from the south. It was there that the fate of the North would be decided. The gathering at the Eagle's Pass was a sight that had not been seen in 1,000 years. It was a living, breathing tapestry of the North, woven together by the will of a single hunter. First came the silent, green-clad archers of Silverwood, their ranks moving like a flowing river of leaves, led by the serene Alara. Then came the thunder of hooves as the horse clans arrived, their colorful banners snapping in the wind. From the west, the grim, heavily armored warriors of Stonefall marched in disciplined columns, their shields locked, their bearded faces set like granite. At their head marched Jarl Theron, and beside him, her red hair like a flame against the gray rock, was Astrid. Finally, a small but determined contingent arrived from the south. It was the people of Oakhaven, led by Mason. They carried no grand banners, only their courage and the memory of their rebuilt home, its hearts still glowing with the blue light they had fought so hard to protect. The leaders of the new Northern Alliance met in a great council. Jarl Theron approached Evelyn, his face a mask of gruff respect. "The mountain can be slow to move, girl," he rumbled, his voice a low apology. "But once it moves, it does not yield." He clasped her forearm, a gesture of absolute solidarity. As the sun began to set on the eve of the battle, casting long shadows across the valley now filled with thousands of warriors, Evelyn stood before the gathered army. She was no longer just the hunter from Oakhaven. She was the heart of this alliance, the catalyst for their unity. "Look around you," her voice cried out, clear and strong, carrying across the silent, waiting army. "Look at the faces of your neighbors. The warrior of the mountains stands beside the rider of the plains. The archer of the forest guards the fishermen of the coast. The Legion believes we are scattered. They believe we are weak. They believe we will fall one by one. Tomorrow, we will show them what a united North looks like. Tomorrow, we fight not for Stonefall, or Silverwood, or Oakhaven. We fight for the North, for our children, for our freedom." A single, unified roar, the voice of a dozen clans become one, rose up to meet the twilight sky. It was the sound of a people who had chosen hope over fear. As the roar faded and a tense, expectant silence fell over the valley, a lone scout on the high ridge cried out. But he was not pointing south, toward the expected enemy.
He was pointing up.
Evelyn, along with every other soul in the valley, tilted her head to the sky. What she saw stole her breath. Descending from the heavens, veiled in the ethereal light of the dying sun, was not a single star, but a silent, shimmering host. At their lead was Lyra, her silver hair flowing, her starlit armor glowing softly. Behind her were dozens, perhaps hundreds, of other battle maidens, a celestial army of celestial witnesses. They were not coming to fight the battle for them. They had come, as the ancient tapestries foretold, to watch over the valiant and to choose the slain. Their arrival was the final, divine affirmation. This was no longer just a battle for survival. It was a battle that would be etched into legend, a struggle for the very soul of their world. As Evelyn looked up at the impossible, beautiful sight, her face was filled with a mixture of profound awe and grim, unshakable resolve. The final battle was here, and the heavens themselves had come to bear witness. The arrival of the Sky Sisters settled a profound, holy silence over the valley of the Eagle's Pass. The thousands of hardened warriors of the North, men and women of practicality and steel, stared up at the celestial host with the wide-eyed wonder of children. The Valkyries were a silent, shimmering army of light, their presence transforming the impending battle from a mere struggle for survival into a saga, a myth being written in real time. Every soldier now knew their actions on the morrow, whether in victory or death, would be witnessed by the heavens themselves. Across the field, Evelyn's eyes met Lyra's. No words were exchanged, but a universe of understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement from the divine witness to the mortal champion who had made this stand possible. Dawn broke, cold and gray, revealing the enemy. The Legion was not an army. It was an inevitability. A horizon-to-horizon sea of black iron and disciplined hate. They marched into the valley in perfect, silent formations. They were a machine of conquest, their numbers easily double that of the Northern Alliance. At their head was no passionate warlord like Kale, but a cold, calculating general whose face was a blank slate of imperial arrogance. The battle began not with a roar, but with a sound like the rushing of a great wind. On Alara's command, the archers of Silverwood and 1,000 others from across the Alliance drew their bows as one. The sky went dark as a cloud of arrows soared into the air, a rain of northern fury that fell upon the Legion's pristine ranks, sowing chaos and death before the first swords ever clashed. Then came the sound of thunder, as the first wave of the Legion crashed against the unmovable shield wall of Jarl Theron's Stonefall warriors. The mountain met the tide, and the valley floor became a grinding, brutal contest of endurance and will. From the plains, the horse clans erupted, a storm of hooves and spears that slammed into the Legion's flanks, preventing the larger army from encircling and crushing the northern host. Evelyn stood on a high ridge with the other leaders, the battlefield spread before her like a living map. This was not a fight to be won with her knife or her bow. It was a battle to be won with her mind. Using the network of Alara's scouts, she was the nerve center of the Alliance. She saw a weakness in the Legion's left flank and sent the horse clans to exploit it. She saw Theron's line beginning to buckle and commanded the reserve force from the coastal towns to reinforce them. She was the weaver, pulling on the threads of her unified army, countering the Legion's every move with the combined and varied strengths of her people. But the Legion was an ocean, and their numbers were relentless. For every wave the Northerners threw back, a larger one crashed against them. The line bent. It began to break. Heroes rose and fell in moments of desperate, brilliant courage. Jarl Theron, a giant of a man fighting at the forefront of his people, was surrounded. He fought like the mountain he was named for, his great axe a whirlwind of death, but even a mountain can be worn down by the sea. A dozen Legion spears found their mark, and the great Jarl of Stonefall finally fell to his knees, his roar of defiance his final act. It was a devastating blow. A cry of despair went up from the Stonefall warriors. The line was about to shatter. But then, the heavens moved. A single Valkyrie, a streak of pure starlight, detached from the celestial host. She descended upon the battlefield, ignoring the chaos of the living, and hovered over the fallen Jarl. A soft, silver light enveloped his body, and to the astonishment of all who watched, his spirit, a shimmering echo of the man he was, rose from his mortal form. The Valkyrie reached out a hand, and taking the spirit of the hero, she ascended back into the sky. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The warriors of the North stared, their grief and despair transformed into a fearless, ecstatic awe. Their valiant dead were not gone. They were chosen. They were being carried to a hall of legends. A wild, fearless joy swept through their ranks, and they threw themselves back into the fray not with desperation, but with the sublime courage of men who knew they fought for a cause worthy of the gods. The Legion soldiers, who knew only the worship of power, saw this impossible act of magic and were filled with a primal, superstitious terror. Their discipline, their greatest weapon, shattered. How could they fight an enemy who did not fear death? Fueled by this divine affirmation, the Northern Alliance made one last, unified, desperate push. They crashed into the wavering Legion line, and this time, it was the black tide that broke. Panic spread, and the unstoppable Southern war machine dissolved into a terrified mob, fleeing the Valley of Horrors. The victory was absolute. In the quiet aftermath, the valley floor was a testament to the terrible price of that victory. The surviving leaders of the North gathered, their faces streaked with blood and tears. Astrid, her face a mask of grief but also fierce pride, now stood as the leader of Stonefall. They had won. They had survived. They all looked to Evelyn. She stood before them, her journey complete. From a lone hunter to the savior of a nation. The war is over, she said, her voice filled with a weary strength. But the hard part is just beginning. We were brought together by a common enemy. Now, we must learn to live together for a common dream. As she spoke, Lyra appeared before her, a final, shimmering vision. The battle maiden did not speak, but she looked at Evelyn, and in her ancient, starlit eyes was a look of profound, celestial respect. She gave a single, slow nod, an acknowledgement from the divine to the mortal who had faced impossible odds and forged a new destiny for her world. Then, as quietly as they had arrived, Lyra and the host of Valkyries ascended, their light fading back into the heavens. Their duty as witnesses was done. Evelyn turned her back on the sky and looked out at the sunrise cresting over the valley. She saw the faces of her people, the survivors, the builders, the future of the new, unified North. The battle was won. The legend was written. Her greatest challenge and her greatest adventure was just beginning.